Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Lisa Gonzalez, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Tate's Hell State Forest, Florida, 3 summers ago. What was meant to be a healing retreat with colleagues turned into something I still can't fully explain. Something that visits me in nightmares that leave me drenched in sweat, afraid to close my eyes again. I'd been working at Suncoast Financial for just over 5 years when our department head, Meredith, suggested we take a team-building trip. Somewhere remote, she'd said, where we can really disconnect and bond. The irony of those words still makes my stomach turn. Our team consisted of Meredith Phillips, a driven 42-year-old divorcee who compensated for her failed marriage with career achievements; Derek Wilson, our analytics specialist, a quiet man in his late 30s with a passion for birdwatching; Alyssa Baker, our newest hire, fresh out of college and eager to prove herself; and Jason Adams, our charismatic senior advisor who could charm clients but seemed to be hiding something behind his perfect smile. Tate's Hell has amazing trails, Jason had suggested during planning. My brother camped there last year, said it was incredible. Pristine wilderness, hardly any other hikers. He leaned forward, eyes bright with enthusiasm. There's even a spot called Whisper Creek that's supposed to be breathtaking. None of us knew then about the forest's ominous name origins, how a farmer named C.B. Tate had wandered the swamp for 7 days before emerging delirious, only to proclaim Tate's Hell before dying. That history might have been our first warning. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in early June. The air hung thick with humidity as we pulled into the small gravel parking area near the trailhead. The forest stretched before us, an intimidating expanse of cypress swamps, pine flatwoods, and tangled vegetation. It's more intense than I expected, Alyssa said, her voice small as she stared into the dense trees. Derek inhaled deeply. Perfect for wildlife, though. I read there are over 300 bird species here. Meredith checked her phone. No service. Perfect. We can truly focus on team dynamics without distractions. I remember feeling a flicker of unease as we shouldered our packs and headed into the trees. The forest seemed to swallow us immediately, the sounds of the nearby highway fading with unsettling speed. Jason led the way, consulting a printed map since our GPS devices were useless here. Whisper Creek is about 4 miles in, he said. We can set up camp there for the night. The trail started easily enough. We walked single file, occasionally stopping to admire particularly massive cypress trees or unusual plants. Derek pointed out bird calls, his face lighting up whenever he spotted movement in the canopy. The forest was alive with sound, chirping, buzzing, the occasional splash from unseen creatures in the murky water that occasionally bordered our path. But as we pressed deeper, I noticed subtle changes. The spaces between trees grew tighter. The ground became spongier underfoot, and the sounds began to change. Bird calls became less frequent. The buzzing of insects took on an almost rhythmic quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. Is it just me, or is it getting cooler? Alyssa asked, rubbing her arms through the temperature was easily in the high 80s. It's the shade, Jason said confidently. The canopy blocks most of the sun here. But it wasn't just cooler, it was different. The air felt heavier, almost resistant, as if we were walking through something thicker than mere humidity. We reached Whisper Creek by late afternoon. It wasn't what I had pictured. Instead of a babbling brook, it was a narrow, slow-moving stream of dark water, so still it reflected the trees above like a perfect mirror. The banks were lined with gnarled cypress knees protruding from the ground like arthritic fingers. This is it. Meredith didn't bother hiding her disappointment. It's atmospheric, Derek offered, though his enthusiasm had visibly dampened. Jason frowned at his map. This has to be it. The coordinates match. We set up camp in a small clearing about 50 feet from the creek. As we worked, I kept glancing at the water. Something about its stillness bothered me. Water should move, should ripple. This looked more like black glass. As dusk approached, we built a fire and prepared dinner. The conversation was stilted, professional habits still governing our interactions despite the wilderness setting. Meredith tried to initiate a discussion about quarterly goals, but even she seemed distracted, her eyes repeatedly drifting to the darkening trees. "Did anyone hear that?" Derek suddenly asked, freezing with his fork halfway to his mouth. We all paused, listening. "I don't hear anything," Jason said after a moment. "Exactly," Derek responded. "No insects, no frogs, nothing." He was right. The forest had gone completely silent. Even our fire seemed to crackle more quietly than it should. "It's probably just a predator nearby," Meredith reasoned. "Animals go quiet when they sense danger." "What kind of predator?" Alyssa asked, her voice higher than normal. "Florida panther, maybe, or a bear," Jason said. "Nothing to worry about if we keep our food secured." The silence persisted as we finished eating. When it was time to sleep, we retreated to our tents, Meredith and Alyssa sharing one, Derek and Jason in another, and me in my small solo tent. I'd always preferred my space, even on trips like this. I don't know what time it was when I woke. The forest remained unnaturally quiet, but something had pulled me from sleep. A sensation more than a sound. A feeling of being watched. My sleeping bag felt suddenly restrictive. Too hot despite the evening chill. I unzipped it and sat up, listening. There, a soft sound coming from the direction of the creek. A whisper, so faint I could almost believe I'd imagined it. But it came again, slightly louder. Not words exactly, but a sound like rushing air shaped into almost speech. Common sense told me to stay in my tent, but curiosity pulled me outside. The night was moonless, the stars obscured by the canopy. Our fire had died to embers, casting just enough light to navigate by. He grabbed my flashlight but didn't turn it on, not wanting to wake the others or announce my presence to whatever was making that sound. The whispering grew louder as I approached the creek, now clearly coming from the water itself. The surface remained unnaturally still, reflecting the faint starlight. I crouched at the bank, straining to understand what I was hearing. "Lisa." I nearly fell into the creek as I spun around. Derek stood a few feet away, his own flashlight clutched in his hand but unlit. "You hear it too?" I whispered. He nodded, moving closer. "What is it?" "I don't know." We both turned toward the water. The whispers had stopped the moment Derek spoke, but now they resumed, more insistent. "It almost sounds like..." Derek began, but trailed off, squinting at the creek. "Like what?" "Like it's saying names." A chill ran through me because he was right. Now that he'd said it, I could hear it too. The whispers were cycling through what sounded like names. Too quickly to catch individual ones, but unmistakably names. "This is crazy," I said, standing up. "It's just water over rocks or something." But there were no rocks in this creek, and the water wasn't moving. Derek suddenly gasped, pointing at the surface. "Look." At first, I saw nothing but the dark reflection of trees. Then movement caught my eye, a ripple in the perfect mirror, expanding outward from the center of the creek. The whispering grew louder as the ripple reached the bank, water lapping gently at the shore. "We should go back," I said, but neither of us moved. The ripple reversed, water drawing back toward the center of the creek, gathering into a small disturbance. As we watched, transfixed, the disturbance grew upward, water rising impossibly against gravity to form a column. "This isn't happening," Derek whispered. The column of water twisted, taking on an almost human shape. A torso, arms, a featureless head. The whispering now came clearly from this figure, and I could suddenly understand the words. "Join us. We are waiting below. So lonely, so cold." Derek's flashlight clicked on, the beam cutting through the night to illuminate the water figure. For a split second, I saw it clearly. Not water at all, but a form composed of countless tiny insects, beetles and mosquitoes, and flies moving together in perfect unison, their wings creating the whispering sound as they vibrated against each other. The light seemed to anger it. The figure collapsed, insects scattering with an angry buzz, the surface of the creek once again becoming perfectly still. "What the fuck was that?" Derek's voice shook. "We need to wake the others," I said. "We need to leave. Now." We hurried back to camp, but as we approached the tents, I realized something was wrong. Our campsite looked different, the tents arranged in an unfamiliar pattern. "Did someone move the tents?" Derek asked. I shook my head, disoriented. "This is our camp, right?" We both turned, looking back toward the creek, then at the campsite again. Everything was the same, our gear, the remnants of our fire, but slightly wrong, as if someone had carefully recreated our camp but made small, deliberate mistakes. Derek approached Meredith and Alyssa's tent. "Meredith," he called softly, then louder. "Meredith, Alyssa." No response. I moved to Jason's tent. "Jason." I unzipped the entrance and shone my light inside. Empty. Both tents were completely empty, sleeping bags unzipped as if their occupants had just stepped out. "They have to be nearby," I said, fighting rising panic. Maybe they heard the creak too. We called their names, first quietly, then shouting into the darkness. The forest absorbed our cries without echo. "Try your phone," Derek suggested, pulling out his own. "I know there's no service, but maybe the flashlight." He stopped staring at his screen. "That's weird. My battery was at 80% when I went to sleep. Now it says 3%. I checked my own phone. The same, almost drained, though I'd barely used it. As Derek's flashlight dimmed, I turned mine on. The beam seemed weaker than it should have been, barely penetrating the darkness. "Something's draining the power," I said. "That's not possible," Derek replied, but his voice lacked conviction. A sound came from behind us, a soft footstep on the pine needle floor. We both turned, my weakening flashlight revealing a figure standing at the edge of our camp. "Meredith?" I called, relief flooding through me. The figure took a step forward, and my relief curdled into dread. It was Meredith's height and build, wearing what looked like Meredith's clothes, but something was profoundly wrong. She moved with jerky, uncoordinated steps, like someone learning to use their limbs for the first time. And her face. My flashlight dimmed further, but I caught glimpses. Her features seemed blurred, as if viewed through rippling water. Her eyes were too dark, too large. Her mouth moved wrong. "Are you okay?" Derek took a step toward her. "Fine." The voice was Meredith's, but flat, emotionless. "I went for a walk, by the creek." "Where are the others?" I asked, fighting the urge to run. Meredith's head tilted at an impossible angle. "Coming. They're coming." Her face split into a smile that was too wide, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. Derek grabbed my arm. "Lisa," he whispered urgently. "That's not Meredith." The thing wearing Meredith's form seemed to hear him. Its smile widened further, the corners of its mouth extending toward its ears. "Not Meredith," it agreed, its voice changing, deepening, taking on that same whispering quality we'd heard from the creek. "Meredith is below, with the others, waiting for you." It lunged with inhuman speed. Derek shoved me aside, taking the brunt of the attack. I heard him scream as they both tumbled to the ground. My flashlight finally died, plunging the scene into darkness. I ran blindly, crashing through underbrush. Branches whipping my face. Behind me, Derek's screams cut off abruptly. I wanted to go back for him, but primal fear drove me forward. My only coherent thought was to get away from the creek, away from the thing that wasn't Meredith. I don't know how long I ran. The forest seemed to shift around me, paths appearing and disappearing, landmarks changing. Several times I found myself heading back toward the creek despite trying to move away from it. The whispering followed me, sometimes distant, sometimes so close it seemed to come from just behind my ear. As the first hint of dawn lightened the sky, I stumbled onto a trail wider than the others. Exhausted and disoriented, I followed it blindly, praying it led to the road, to civilization, to anywhere but that creek. The trail ended at a small wooden platform, a bird-watching station, and there, sitting with his back to me, was Derek. Relief nearly buckled my knees. "Derek! Thank God! We need to get help." He didn't respond or turn. I approached slowly, dread building with each step. "Derek?" When I reached him, I saw why he hadn't answered. His eyes stared sightlessly forward, his skin gray and waxen. But what froze my blood was the movement beneath his skin. Small bulges traveling up his neck, across his cheeks, behind his eyes. Something was inside him, moving. I backed away, a scream building in my throat. Derek's head turned toward me with a series of jerky movements, though the rest of his body remained motionless. His mouth opened, and instead of words, a stream of small black insects poured out, flying directly toward my face. I fled again, no direction in mind except away. The sun was rising now, filtering through the trees, but it brought no comfort. The forest in daylight was just as menacing, the increased visibility revealing twisted trees that seemed to face me no matter which way I turned. I crashed through a dense thicket and suddenly found myself at the creek again, the same spot where Derek and I had seen the water figure. But the creek had changed. It was wider now, its surface bubbling and churning, and floating in the center was Jason's backpack. Movement on the opposite bank caught my eye. Alyssa stood there, her posture as unnaturally stiff as Meredith's had been. "Lisa," she called, her voice eerily normal. "You made it. We've been worried." Beside her, Jason appeared, then Meredith, all smiling with two wide mouths. "The water is wonderful," Jason said. "You should join us." I noticed now that they were all wet, their clothes soaked and clinging to their bodies. Water dripped from their hair, their fingertips, but it was dark, almost black, not at all like normal water. "What happened to you?" I managed to ask, though I already knew they weren't my colleagues anymore. "We evolved," Meredith said, her head tilting at that impossible angle again. "The creek showed us how. It's been waiting so long for new vessels." "Vessels for what?" All three smiled in perfect unison. "For what lives in the water. For what has always lived in the water. It's been trapped here for centuries, but now it can leave. In us. In you." I backed away, but behind me came a splash. I turned to see Derek rising from the creek, water streaming from his mouth and eyes. "Don't fight it, Lisa," he said, water bubbling between his words. "It doesn't hurt, not after you stop breathing." They began to move toward me from all sides, closing in slowly, confidently, knowing I had nowhere to run. In desperation, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my lighter, the one vice I hadn't been able to shake despite years of trying to quit smoking. If water was their element, then perhaps... I grabbed a low-hanging branch, ignoring the thorns that tore at my palm, and put the flame to the dry leaves. Florida's summer heat had made the forest a tinderbox. The leaves caught immediately. The figures hesitated, their unison broken. I used their moment of confusion to break through their circle, shoving past Jason, feeling something wet and cold detach from his arm and cling to mine. I scraped it off against a tree, not daring to look at what it might be. Behind me, the fire spread with unnatural speed, as if the forest itself was desperate to burn away the corruption. Screams followed me. Not human screams, but sounds like rushing water and buzzing insects formed into expressions of rage. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. The smoke was thick now, driving me forward as much as the fear of what pursued me. When I finally broke through the tree line onto the highway, I collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping and sobbing. A car stopped. an elderly couple who thought I'd been caught in a forest fire. In a way, they were right. They called 911, and soon the area was swarming with firefighters, police, and paramedics. I tried to tell them about my friends, but my story made no sense, even to me, in the harsh light of day. Search and rescue teams found no trace of Meredith, Derek, Jason, or Alyssa. The fire had consumed a significant portion of the forest around Whisper Creek before being contained. Officials concluded that my colleagues had likely been trapped by the fire, a fire they believed I had accidentally started, though they were sympathetic to my traumatized state. I didn't argue. How could I explain what I'd seen? Who would believe that something in that creek had taken my friends, had worn them like suits, had nearly taken me too? 3 days after my rescue, lying in my hospital bed, I received a text message from Meredith's phone. Impossible, since her phone was presumably lost in the forest. The message contained only 4 words. "We are still waiting." I deleted it, changed my number, eventually moved to a different state. But sometimes when I wash my hands or take a shower, I see something move beneath my skin. A subtle ripple, gone so quickly I can dismiss it as imagination. And at night, I often wake to the sound of whispering, my mouth inexplicably filled with the taste of stagnant water. They're patient, whatever they are, patient and persistent. And sometimes I find myself researching other forests, other remote places with bodies of still, dark water. Not because I want to run from what's inside me, but because increasingly I feel an urge to help it find new vessels. Maybe I'll see you there someday, by a quiet creek in the wilderness. And maybe, just maybe, I'll already be waiting when you arrive. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 31 years old. This happened in Tate's Hell State Forest, Florida, 3 summers ago, when what was supposed to be a healing journey turned into a nightmare that still haunts my dreams. The divorce had been finalized just 2 weeks earlier. After 5 years of marriage, David and I had become strangers, our relationship deteriorating into cold silences and bitter arguments. When it was over, I felt hollow, a shell of myself wandering through the empty rooms of our once shared apartment in Tallahassee. "You need to get away," my therapist had suggested during our last session. "Nature has healing properties. It might help you reconnect with yourself." That's how I ended up planning a solo 4-day hiking trip in Tate's Hell State Forest. The irony of the name didn't escape me, but I was drawn to its wild beauty. 65,000 acres of cypress swamps, pine flatwoods, and isolated wilderness just southwest of Tallahassee. Perfect for someone who needed to escape humanity for a while. I wasn't a complete novice. I'd been on overnight camping trips before, though always with others. This would be my first solo expedition, but I had researched thoroughly, purchased quality gear, and left my itinerary with my sister, Angela. I would follow the High Bluff Coastal Trail, setting up camp at designated spots each night. The forest welcomed me on that first morning with unseasonable coolness for June in Florida. Dappled sunlight filtered through the canopy as I set out, my pack comfortable against my back, walking stick in hand. The weight of the past months seemed to lighten with each step deeper into the woods. By late afternoon, I had covered about 8 miles and reached my first campsite near a small creek. As I set up my tent, I savored the solitude. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves, occasional bird calls, and the soft gurgle of the creek. I built a small fire, heated my freeze-dried pasta, and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Night fell quickly in the forest. I sat by my dying fire, staring into the embers and thinking about the future I would need to rebuild. That's when I first heard it, a soft, mournful sound carried on the evening breeze. A voice? A distant animal? I couldn't tell, but something about it raised the hair on my arms. Just wildlife, I assured myself, dousing the fire and retreating to my tent. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, exhausted from the day's hike, and fell into a dreamless sleep. The next morning dawned bright and humid. I broke camp efficiently, eager to continue my journey. According to my map, today's hike would take me deeper into the forest, through an area locally known as Dwarf Cypress Dome. The path became more challenging, wetter, with cypress knees jutting from the damp earth and occasional boardwalks over particularly swampy sections. Around midday, I stopped for lunch on a small, dry knoll. While eating my energy bar and trail mix, I noticed something odd. A small cairn of stones that seemed deliberately placed. It wasn't unusual to see trail markers, but this one had an unsettling quality. The stones balanced in ways that seemed to defy gravity, topped with what appeared to be a small animal skull. I approached it carefully, curiosity overcoming my unease. The skull was from a small mammal, a rabbit, perhaps. But as I leaned in for a closer look, I noticed markings etched into the largest stone. Not random scratches, but deliberate lines forming what looked like a crude stick figure with elongated limbs. A chill ran through me despite the humid heat. Someone had been here recently, someone who wasn't following leave no trace principles. I told myself it was probably just local teenagers playing at being spooky, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I continued hiking, pushing the incident from my mind as I focused on the beauty around me. Sunlight filtered through the cypress canopy, creating ethereal patterns on the forest floor. Occasionally, I spotted wildlife, a white-tailed deer watching cautiously from a distance, a red-shouldered hawk circling overhead. By late afternoon, dark clouds began rolling in from the west. The forecast had mentioned possible thunderstorms, but they weren't supposed to arrive until tomorrow. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach my planned campsite before the weather turned. I didn't make it. 2 miles from my destination, the skies opened up. Rain fell in heavy sheets, turning the trail to mud within minutes. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by booming thunder that seemed to shake the ground beneath my feet. I needed shelter, fast. Through the curtain of rain, I spotted what looked like an old hunting cabin just off the trail. It wasn't on my map, but I was in no position to be picky. I splashed toward it, relief washing over me as I reached the small, weather-beaten structure. The door creaked open at my touch. Inside, it was dark and smelled of damp wood and something else, something musty and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. But it was dry, and that was all that mattered. I shrugged off my waterlogged pack and used my flashlight to examine my temporary haven. The cabin was small, just one room with a rustic wooden table, a chair, and what might have once been a cot in the corner, now just a metal frame with a few rotting strips of canvas. Dust covered everything, but what caught my attention were the walls. They were covered with crude drawings similar to the marking I'd seen on the stone cairn, stick figures with elongated limbs, some alone, some in groups, some appearing to chase or consume smaller figures. Folk art, I murmured to myself, trying to ignore the growing knot of dread in my stomach. I was being ridiculous. This was just an old cabin with some strange decorations. Nothing to be afraid of. As if in response to my thoughts, something heavy thudded against the roof. I jumped, heart racing, before reasoning it was probably just a branch dislodged by the storm. The rain intensified, drumming against the cabin like thousands of impatient fingers. With no cell service and nowhere else to go, I decided to make the best of my situation. I changed into dry clothes, spread my wet gear to dry, and prepared a cold dinner of jerky and trail mix. I would wait out the storm and continue to my planned campsite in the morning. Night fell early under the storm clouds. I'd set up my sleeping bag on the cleanest part of the floor and was trying to read by flashlight when the noises began. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a low, moaning sound that came and went. But as I listened, it began to sound more like words, indistinct, whispered phrases that I couldn't quite make out. "It's just the wind," I said aloud, my voice sounding small in the darkness. But the whispering continued, seeming to circle the cabin. And then came the scratching, faint at first, then more insistent, like fingernails dragging across the wooden walls. My mouth went dry. I sat frozen in my sleeping bag, flashlight clutched in my trembling hand. The rational part of my brain suggested animals seeking shelter from the storm. Raccoons, maybe, or possums. But another part, a primal part, screamed danger. The scratching stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own rapid breathing. Then came a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate raps that couldn't possibly be mistaken for anything else. Someone was outside. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" No answer, just another 3 knocks, slightly louder this time. I should have stayed quiet. I should have pretended the cabin was empty. Instead, I found myself standing, moving toward the door on legs that felt disconnected from my body. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Let me in." The voice was soft, almost childlike, but there was something wrong with it. A hollow quality, as if it were coming from the bottom of a well. "I'm lost in the storm. Please let me in." My hand hovered over the latch. Something deep inside me was screaming not to open that door. I can't," I stammered. "The door is stuck. You'll have to find shelter somewhere else." A pause, then, "You're lying." The voice had changed, deepening, losing its childlike quality. "Let me in, Emily." Ice flooded my veins. I had told no one my name. I hadn't registered with any Forest Service. There was no way someone out here should know who I was. "Go away," I shouted, backing away from the door. "Leave me alone or I'm calling for help." An empty threat. We both knew there was no cell service here. A sound came then. Not quite laughter, not quite sobbing. A terrible broken sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. The crude wooden latch held, but for how long? I scrambled for my pack, fumbling for my hunting knife, the only weapon I had. The pounding at the door continued, growing more frenzied. Wood splintered. Through a crack that appeared in the door frame, I caught a glimpse of what was outside. Not a person, but something else. Something pale and emaciated with limbs too long, too jointed, fingers like white twigs scraping at the wood. My scream caught in my throat. This couldn't be real. I had to be hallucinating or dreaming. A nightmare brought on by stress and isolation. The creature, I couldn't think of it as human anymore, spoke again, its voice now a guttural rasp. "I've been waiting for you, Emily. We've all been waiting." "We?" I whispered, though I hadn't meant to speak aloud. As if in answer, more voices joined the first, a chorus of whispers from all around the cabin. And with them came more scratching, more pounding, not just at the door now, but at the windows, the walls, the roof. They were surrounding me. The cabin's single window shattered inward in a spray of glass. Something began to squeeze through. A limb far too thin and pale to be human, jointed in too many places, ending in fingers like white twigs tipped with black claws. I acted without thinking. Grabbing my still-wet hiking boots, I yanked them on. Then I seized my pack with one hand, my knife with the other, and ran for the door. If I was going to die, it wouldn't be cowering in a corner. I hit the door with my shoulder, sending it crashing outward. I had a confused impression of pale shapes scattering, of eyes reflecting my flashlight beam like animals caught in headlights. Then I was running, splashing through puddles, branches whipping at my face as I plunged blindly into the forest. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the trees, and the ground was treacherous with mud. I ran without direction, without thought, pure animal instinct driving me away from what I'd seen. Behind me, I could hear them, crashing through the underbrush, that terrible broken laughter floating on the night air. My foot caught on a cypress knee, and I went down hard, face first into the mud. My knife flew from my hand, disappearing into the darkness. I scrambled up, but it was too late. They were surrounding me, pale shapes moving just at the edge of my flashlight beam. In desperation, I swung my walking stick in a wide arc. It connected with something that gave a high, inhuman shriek. Emboldened, I swung again, creating space to run once more. I splashed through shallow water, deeper into the swamp. If I could just find the trail again, find my way back to civilization. My flashlight beam caught something ahead. Another cabin, larger than the first, with a faint light glowing from within. Hope surged through me. Someone else was out here, someone who might help. I changed course, running toward that beacon of light. Behind me, the creatures seemed to hesitate, their pursuit faltering. I reached the cabin's door and pounded on it with my fist. "Help!" I screamed. "Please, let me in." The door opened, and warm light spilled out. An elderly man stood there, rifle in hand, his weathered face creased with concern. "Lord Almighty, girl, what are you doing out here at this hour?" he demanded, but he stepped aside to let me in. I stumbled past him, collapsing onto the wooden floor as he shut and bolted the door behind me. "They're after me," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "These things in the forest." The old man's expression darkened. He moved to the window, peering out into the night before pulling heavy curtains across it. "What did you see exactly?" he asked, his voice low and tense. I described the pale, elongated creatures, the unearthly voices, the way they had known my name. With each detail, the old man's face grew more grim. "You've met the Hollow Ones," he said finally, setting his rifle on the table but keeping it within easy reach. "Most folks who see them don't live to tell about it." "The Hollow Ones?" I repeated, my voice small. The old man, who introduced himself as Jeremiah Blackwood, nodded gravely. He was a former forest ranger who had retired to this remote cabin 15 years ago. Over a cup of strong black coffee that he pressed into my trembling hands, he told me the legend. According to local lore, Tate's Hell got its name from a farmer named Tate who got lost in the swamp while searching for his lost cow in 1875. When he emerged days later, delirious and on the verge of death, he could only say, "My name is C.B. Tate, and I just came from hell," before collapsing. But what most tourists didn't know, Jeremiah explained, was what had happened to Tate in those missing days. The old stories, passed down through generations of locals, told of creatures that lived deep in the swamp, not quite human, not quite spirit, that fed on the life essence of the lost and lonely. "They find those who are broken," Jeremiah said, his eyes fixing on mine with uncomfortable intensity. "Those grieving, lost in their own way. They call to them, draw them deep into the forest. They empty them, leave nothing but hollow shells behind." I thought of my divorce, the emptiness I had felt, the reason I had come to this forest in the first place. A cold dread settled in my stomach. "How do you know all this?" I asked. "And how have you survived out here?" A shadow passed over Jeremiah's face. "My wife," he said softly. "Margaret. We came here to retire, to live closer to nature. One day she went mushroom foraging and she came back different, hollow, talking about the pale ones who lived in the cypress dome, who had shown her wonderful things. 3 days later, she walked out into the swamp at night. I never saw her again." He rose stiffly and moved to a trunk in the corner. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound journal and handed it to me. Inside were detailed drawings of the creatures I had seen, alongside notes in a spidery hand. "I've been studying them ever since," he said, "learning their habits, their weaknesses. Iron repels them. Old folklore got that right. Salt, too. And they can't stand the light of a fire blessed with certain herbs." He nodded toward his fireplace, where flames danced merrily, giving off a strange, sweet smell. "But most importantly," he continued, "they can only take you if you give in to despair. If you surrender to the emptiness they sense in you. They feed on that surrender, you see." I spent that night at Jeremiah's cabin, sleeping fitfully on his worn sofa despite his assurances that the hollow ones wouldn't approach his protected home. In the morning, he insisted on escorting me back to the trailhead, arming me with an iron railroad spike, more effective than that knife you lost, and a small pouch of herbs to burn in my campfire. "Remember," he said as we parted at the main trail, his eyes intense beneath bushy white brows, "don't listen to their voices. They'll try to sound like people you know, people you trust, and whatever you do, don't look directly into their eyes. That's how they begin to hollow you out." I thanked him profusely, but as I hiked back toward civilization, a nagging doubt began to form. Jeremiah's story had been fantastic, the stuff of campfire tales. Was it possible that stress and isolation had caused me to hallucinate the entire encounter with the Hollow Ones? Perhaps what I had seen were just ordinary people, other hikers or locals, and my frightened mind had transformed them into monsters. Even the cabin where I'd met Jeremiah seemed strange in retrospect. It had been unnaturally clean and well-maintained for a place so deep in the swamp, and some of his behaviors, the intensity of his gaze, his extensive knowledge of local folklore, the convenient iron spike, and herbs, seemed almost too perfect, as if he had been expecting me. By the time I reached my car at the trailhead, I had almost convinced myself that I had experienced some kind of stress-induced breakdown. I would go home, schedule an appointment with my therapist, and put this bizarre experience behind me. That resolution lasted until I began unpacking my gear at home. At the bottom of my pack, tucked into a side pocket I rarely used, I found a small object wrapped in cloth. I had no memory of placing it there. With trembling fingers, I unwrapped it. Inside was a small, carved wooden figure, a stick person with elongated limbs, and on the back, scratched in crude letters, "We're still waiting, Emily." My blood ran cold. I dropped the figure as if it had burned me. For a long moment, I stood frozen in my living room, the implications washing over me in waves of horror. They knew where I lived now. That night, I burned the figure in my backyard grill, watching until it was nothing but ash. Then I packed essential belongings and drove to my sister's house 3 hours away, where I stayed for 2 weeks. I told her a simplified version of events, that I'd had a frightening encounter with some strange people in the forest and didn't feel safe at home. Eventually, I returned to my apartment, installed a security system, and tried to move on with my life. Months passed without incident. I found a new job, made new friends, even started dating again. The memories of Tate's hell began to fade, taking on the quality of a particularly vivid nightmare, until last week. I was walking home from dinner with friends when I passed a homeless man huddled in a doorway. Something made me pause. Perhaps a misplaced sense of charity, perhaps the unusual stillness of his posture. As I fumbled in my purse for spare change, he looked up. It was Jeremiah Blackwood. But not as I had known him. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and empty. When he spoke, his voice had that same hollow quality I remembered from the forest. "They're coming for you soon, Emily," he whispered. "You didn't really think you could escape, did you? No one escapes the Hollow Ones once they've marked you. We've just been waiting for you to feel whole again." He smiled then, his mouth stretching too wide, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. "After all," he continued, his voice changing, multiplying into the chorus I remembered from that terrible night, "empty vessels are no use to us. We need you full before we can hollow you out properly." I ran. Behind me, I heard that broken laughter, rising above the street noise of downtown Tallahassee. That was 3 days ago. I haven't left my apartment since. I've lined my windows and doors with iron nails and salt. I burn Jeremiah's herbs continuously, filling my small apartment with their sweet smoke. I've called in sick to work, stopped answering my phone. My sister is worried. She's texted several times about coming to check on me. But how can I be sure it would really be her at the door? Last night, I dreamed of the Cypress Dome. In my dream, I walked willingly into the swamp, toward a circle of pale figures waiting beneath the moon. Their arms were open in welcome. Their faces, so many faces I recognized, including my ex-husband, my parents, my therapist, all wearing the same empty smile. And I was smiling too as I moved toward their embrace, some terrible knowledge blooming inside me, that emptiness was easier than fullness, that surrender was sweeter than struggle. I woke gasping, clawing at my chest, certain for one terrible moment that I could feel myself hollowing out from the inside. I'm writing this all down now, while I still can, while I'm still me. I don't know how much longer I can resist. They're outside my apartment now. I can hear them scratching at the walls, whispering my name in the voices of everyone I've ever loved. The herbs are almost gone, the salt lines are thinning, and I'm so very tired of being afraid. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, becoming hollow. Maybe there's a kind of peace in emptiness. Maybe… No, I can't think like that. That's how they win. If you're reading this, if you find this account, know that they're real. The hollow ones of Tate's hell are real. And once they've marked you, they'll wait, patiently, endlessly, for that moment of weakness, that crack in your defenses. Don't go into the forest alone. Don't follow strange lights in the darkness. And if you hear whispering on the wind that seems to know your name, run. Run and don't look back. Look, because I don't think I can run anymore. And the whispers are getting louder. My name is Rebecca Hill, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Ocala National Forest in Florida last summer, a trip that was supposed to help me overcome my fear of isolation after my divorce. The verdant canopy of oak and pine trees blocked most of the afternoon sun as I pulled my Subaru into the small graveled parking area at the trailhead for the Hidden Pond Trail. According to my research, this was one of the less frequented paths in the forest, perfect for someone like me who wanted solitude without encountering too many hikers. My black Labrador, Duke, whined from the back seat, eager to stretch his legs after the 3-hour drive from Tampa. "Almost there. Buddy," I said, checking my hiking backpack one last time. Water bottles, trail mix, first aid kit, flashlight, multi-tool, tent, sleeping bag, matches, phone charger, map. Everything seemed in order for our 2-night camping adventure. This trip wasn't just about getting fresh air. It was about proving something to myself. After Mark left me for his 24-year-old secretary last year, I'd become almost agoraphobic, afraid to venture beyond the safety of my apartment and office. My therapist, Dr. Winters, had suggested gradually pushing my boundaries, and this solo camping trip was the culmination of months of smaller challenges. Duke bounded out of the car when I opened the door, his tail wagging frantically. At 5 years old, he was energetic but well-trained, my loyal companion through the divorce and the dark months that followed. I fastened his special K9 backpack, which carried his food and collapsible water bowl, then locked the car and slipped the keys into my pocket. "Let's go explore," I said, adjusting my sun hat and securing my backpack straps. The trail started innocuously enough, a well-marked dirt path flanked by palmetto bushes and tall pines. The air smelled of earth and pine sap, with an underlying sweetness from wildflowers dotting the trail's edge. Birdsong accompanied our hike, and occasionally Duke would pause, nose twitching, to investigate some animal scent that my human senses couldn't detect. According to my map, Hidden Pond was about 3 miles in, with a small clearing suitable for camping nearby. The guidebook had warned that cell service was spotty in this part of the forest, so I'd downloaded offline maps and told my sister Emma where I'd be. Standard safety protocol. About a mile into our hike, the trail narrowed and the vegetation grew denser. The afternoon light filtered through the leaves in dappled patterns, casting moving shadows across the ground. The birdsong had lessened. I realized suddenly. The forest had grown oddly quiet except for the crunch of my boots on the path and Duke's occasional panting. "Feeling peaceful already, aren't we, boy?" I said, more to break the silence than anything else. My voice sounded strange, too loud yet somehow muffled as if the forest was absorbing the sound. We continued hiking, and I consulted my map again. The trail forked ahead, and I needed to take the right path to reach Hidden Pond. As we approached the fork, I noticed something unusual. A small arrangement of stones in the middle of the path. They were stacked in a tiny pyramid, clearly placed there deliberately. Probably by another hiker, I thought, though something about it unsettled me. Duke growled softly, staring at the stone arrangement. "It's nothing, buddy," I assured him, though I gave the stones a wide berth as we passed. "Just trail markers," I told myself. "Hikers do this all the time." We took the right fork, and the trail began to slope gently downward. The trees here were even older, their trunks wider, branches creating a lower canopy that blocked more sunlight. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees, and I shivered despite the Florida heat. 2 hours into our hike, we should have reached Hidden Pond according to the map, but there was no pond in sight, just more forest. I stopped, frowning at my map. Had I missed a turn? "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, checking my compass. We were heading northeast as the trail should, but the pond wasn't where it was supposed to be. Maybe the map was outdated. Duke whined, pressing against my leg. He'd been acting increasingly anxious for the past 20 minutes, stopping frequently, looking back the way we'd come, and staying unusually close to me instead of exploring ahead as he normally would. "What's wrong, boy?" I crouched, stroking his head. His ears were flat against his skull, and he was panting more than the easy hike warranted. "Are you picking up on something I'm not?" As if in answer, a twig snapped somewhere in the forest to our left. Duke's head whipped around and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "Hello," I called out, straightening up. "Another hiker out there?" No answer came, just the strange, muffled silence of the forest. I felt a prickle of unease. We were alone out here, which was exactly what I'd wanted, but suddenly that solitude felt less like peaceful isolation and more like vulnerability. "Come on," I said to Duke, voice deliberately cheerful. "Let's keep going. We'll find the pond or a suitable camping spot soon." We pressed on, but my senses were now on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call seemed magnified. The weight of my backpack felt heavier, the straps digging into my shoulders. The afternoon was waning, the dappled light taking on the golden hue of approaching sunset. I needed to find a place to camp soon. Finally, after another 30 minutes of hiking, the trees thinned, and we emerged into a small clearing with a pond at its center. Relief washed over me. "See, Duke, we found it," I said, though something felt off. The pond was larger than the guidebook had described, and the clearing didn't quite match the pictures I'd seen online during my research. Still, it was a suitable spot to set up camp, with flat ground near the water. I unclipped Duke's leash to let him explore while I set up the tent. He immediately went to the pond's edge, sniffing cautiously at the water. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the trees and darkening sky like a mirror. No ripples, not even from insects skimming the surface. Unusual, but I was too preoccupied with setting up camp to give it much thought. As I was hammering in the final tent stake, Duke started barking. Not his usual, "I see a squirrel" bark, but a deeper, more alarmed sound. I turned to see him facing the other side of the clearing, hackles raised. "Duke, what is it?" He continued barking, taking a few steps toward whatever he was seeing, then backing up, clearly conflicted. I stood, scanning the tree line across the clearing, but saw nothing unusual. Just the darkening forest and lengthening shadows as the sun continued its descent. But Duke wouldn't stop barking, becoming increasingly agitated. "Come here, boy," I called firmly. After a moment's hesitation, he retreated to my side, still growling softly. I clipped his leash back on, suddenly glad to have him tethered near me. "Let's get a fire going," I murmured, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. A fire would provide light, heat, and a psychological sense of security. I'd collected some kindling along our hike, and there was plenty of fallen wood around the clearing. The fire was stubbornly difficult to light. The kindling caught, but the flames kept dying out despite the wood being dry. After several attempts, I finally got a modest fire going, though the flames were strangely dim, giving off less light and heat than they should. I fed Duke and prepared a simple dinner for myself, dehydrated pasta that required just hot water from my camp stove. As we ate, the forest grew completely dark except for the weak glow of my fire. The stars should have been visible in the clearing, but when I looked up, I saw only pitch blackness. Cloud cover, perhaps? But I couldn't make out clouds either, just an oppressive darkness overhead. "This isn't what I expected," I admitted to Duke, who lay beside me, alert despite his tiredness. "Maybe we should head back tomorrow instead of staying another night." I cleaned up our dinner carefully, storing the food in an odor-proof bag and hanging it from a tree branch away from our campsite, standard procedure in bear country, though black bears in Florida typically avoided humans. As I was securing the food, I heard it, a voice calling from somewhere in the darkness beyond our campsite. "Hello?" The voice was faint, female with an odd, hollow quality. "Is someone there? I need help." Duke was on his feet instantly, a growl building in his throat. "Hello?" I called back, heart pounding. "Where are you?" "Please help," the voice called again, seeming to come from a different direction now, deeper in the forest. "I'm lost." I hesitated, torn between the instinct to help and a growing sense that something was very wrong. Who else would be out here at night? And how could they be lost so close to our campsite without having seen our fire? "Stay there," I shouted. "I have a fire. Walk toward the light." "Please," the voice called again, now seeming to come from yet another direction. "I'm hurt. I need help." Duke's growl deepened and he pulled against his leash toward our tent, as if wanting to hide. My hands trembled as I unclipped the bear spray from my belt. Something wasn't right. The voice was moving too quickly, coming from too many different directions. "I have a dog and bear spray," I called out, trying to sound confident. "Who are you?" No answer came this time, just the unnatural silence of the forest and the soft crackle of my underwhelming fire. I backed slowly toward the tent, Duke pressed against my leg. "Let's get inside," I whispered to him. "I don't like this." Once inside the tent, I zipped the door closed and switched on my lantern. Duke was panting anxiously, eyes fixed on the tent wall facing the forest. I pulled out my phone. No service, as expected. I opened the compass app more out of nervous habit than any real need and frowned at the screen. The needle was spinning wildly, never settling on a direction. "Battery interference," I muttered, though I knew better. Electronic compasses didn't behave that way because of low batteries. A rustling sound came from outside, like something, or someone, moving through the underbrush around our campsite. Duke's growl was constant now, a vibration I could feel where his body pressed against mine. "Hello?" I called again, clutching the bear spray. "Who's there?" The rustling stopped. Then came a sound that made my blood freeze. A soft, strange clicking noise, almost like a tongue against teeth, but too rapid and rhythmic to be human. The clicking moved around the tent, circling us slowly. I covered my mouth to stifle a whimper, mind racing. What makes that sound? Not a bear, not a panther. None of the wildlife I'd researched before this trip. Duke was shaking now, his growl giving way to whimpers. This dog, who'd faced down aggressive neighborhood pit bulls without flinching, was terrified. "It's okay," I whispered, stroking his head with a trembling hand. "We're safe in here." But I didn't believe my own words. The tent's thin nylon walls suddenly seemed absurdly inadequate protection from whatever circled outside. The clicking stopped directly in front of the tent door. Duke fell silent, freezing against me. I held my breath, finger on the trigger of the bear spray, eyes fixed on the door's zipper. Something touched the tent. Not a branch or animal paw, but what felt like fingers pressing against the nylon, moving slowly across the surface. I could see the fabric indent with each touch, tracing a pattern I couldn't discern. Then came the voice again, the same female voice from before, but now it was directly outside our tent, no more than 2 feet from my face. "Rebecca," it said softly. "Let me in, Rebecca." My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't told my name to anyone out here. There was no way. "I'm cold, Rebecca," the voice continued, now sounding almost childlike. "Please let me in." "Go away," I managed to choke out, voice cracking. "Leave us alone." "But Rebecca," the voice said, changing subtly, taking on multiple tones at once, as if several people were speaking in unison. "We've been waiting for you. You came to us, remember? You wanted to prove something." The fingers continued tracing patterns on the tent, moving faster now. The material bulged inward suddenly, as if something, was leaning against it. Duke let out a yelp and scrambled backward, pressing against the far side of the tent. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. When I finally switched it on and pointed it at the tent wall, the pressure disappeared immediately. No shadow was visible, no silhouette against the nylon. "Leave us alone!" I shouted, voice stronger now, fueled by fear and adrenaline. "I have a weapon!" Silence followed. The clicking had stopped. The presence outside seemed to have gone. After several minutes of straining to hear anything, I began to relax marginally, though I kept the flashlight on and the bear spray in hand. "I think it's gone, Duke," I whispered. He didn't seem convinced, still cowering at the back of the tent, eyes fixed on the door. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound from the forest seemed amplified: the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft gurgle of the pond's water. The fire outside had died completely, far sooner than it should have. The darkness pressed against the tent, held at bay only by my flashlight's beam. As the night wore on, Duke eventually dozed fitfully, but I remained vigilant. My phone's battery drained unusually quickly, forcing me to switch to my backup power bank much earlier than expected. The lantern, too, seemed to dim faster than normal. Around what I estimated to be 3 a.m., I heard it again. The soft clicking sound, more distant now, coming from the direction of the pond. I nudged Duke awake, pressing a hand over his muzzle to keep him quiet. He tensed immediately, ears perked toward the sound. I crept to the tent window, a small mesh panel that looked out toward the water, and peered out. The night was moonless, the darkness nearly absolute, but as my eyes adjusted, I could make out the pond's surface reflecting what little starlight penetrated the cloud cover. Something was moving at the water's edge. At first, I thought it was a deer. The shape was roughly the right size, standing on what appeared to be 4 limbs. But as I watched, the shape straightened, rising up on 2 legs in a motion no deer could make. It stood there, a darker silhouette against the dark forest, impossibly tall and thin. I bit back a scream, ducking down below the window. Duke was trembling violently beside me, making small whimpering sounds. I held him close, burying my face in his fur, trying to control my breathing. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, the figure was gone. The pond's surface, previously still as glass, now rippled gently, as if something had just slipped beneath its surface. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and vigilance. By the time dawn's gray light filtered through the trees, I was exhausted but resolute. We needed to leave. Immediately. I packed up camp with record speed, my hands clumsy with fatigue but driven by urgency. Duke stayed pressed against my leg the entire time, jumping at every sound from the forest. The strange, oppressive silence of the previous day had been replaced by normal woodland noises: birdsong, rustling leaves, the occasional scurrying of small animals. It should have been reassuring, but somehow the normalcy felt like a mask, a pretense. As I was rolling up my sleeping bag, I noticed something I'd missed in the dim light of the tent: a strange pattern drawn in what looked like dirt on the floor of the tent, near the door. Interlocking circles and jagged lines, forming a symbol I didn't recognize. I hadn't tracked in that much dirt. Had I? I quickly scuffed it away with my boot, trying to ignore the implications. We needed to leave. Questions and analysis could come later, when we were safely away from this place. With the tent packed away, I surveyed our campsite one last time. The fire pit contained only cold ash with no remnants of the logs I'd burned. The ground around the tent was marked with strange indentations. Not footprints exactly, but elongated depressions in the soil, as if something heavy had been dragged in a circular pattern around where we'd slept. "Let's go, Duke," I said, voice hoarse from lack of sleep. He needed no encouragement, pulling eagerly toward the trail that would take us back to the car. I hesitated, looking at the pond one last time. In the morning light, it looked ordinary enough, a small body of water surrounded by reeds and water lilies. Yet something caught my eye near the far shore, a dark shape breaking the surface. Too large for a fish, too small for an alligator. It disappeared before I could identify it, leaving expanding ripples across the water's surface. We set off down the trail at a brisk pace, Duke leading the way, clearly as eager as I was to put distance between us and that campsite. I consulted my map again, but something was wrong. The trails didn't match what I was seeing. Paths that should have connected didn't. Landmarks were missing or misplaced. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, trying to orient myself using the rising sun. We came from the east, so we should be heading west to get back to the car. But the compass app was still malfunctioning, the needle spinning randomly. I'd have to rely on my sense of direction and memory. We followed what I believed to be the main trail for nearly an hour, moving at a fast clip despite my fatigue. The forest seemed different in daylight, less menacing, more like the nature preserve it was supposed to be. Had I imagined everything? Was it just the darkness and isolation playing tricks on my mind? Then Duke stopped abruptly, hackles rising. He stared ahead, a low growl building in his throat. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, peering down the trail. There, in the middle of the path about 50 yards ahead, stood another stone pyramid, identical to the one we'd passed yesterday, but I was certain this trail wasn't the same one we'd hiked in on. "No," I said aloud, "that's not possible." Duke barked once, sharply, then pulled against his leash, trying to drag me in a different direction, away from the trail. "Duke, no! We need to stay on the path," I insisted, though doubt was creeping in. The trail should have taken us back to the parking area by now. A snapping twig made me turn. Someone was approaching from behind us. I could hear footsteps now, steady and deliberate. "Hello," I called out, voice shaking. "Is someone there?" No answer came, but the footsteps continued, drawing closer. "Let's go," I told Duke, and we hurried down the trail past the stone pyramid. I didn't want to meet whoever, whatever, was following us. We moved faster now, almost jogging. The weight of my backpack dug into my shoulders, and sweat trickled down my back despite the morning coolness. Duke kept looking back, ears flat against his head. The trail curved sharply, and as we rounded the bend, I stopped short. There, not 20 feet ahead, stood a figure. It was a woman, or something that resembled a woman. She stood unnaturally still, her back to us, wearing what appeared to be a simple white dress that hung oddly on her too thin frame. Her hair was long and black, hanging limply to her waist. "Excuse me," I called, voice barely above a whisper. "Can you help us? We're trying to get back to the hidden pond trailhead." Slowly, with a fluidity that seemed wrong somehow, she turned. I caught a glimpse of a pale face, hollow cheeks and eyes. God, her eyes were solid black, no whites at all, like empty sockets that somehow still saw. Duke erupted in frantic barking, lunging against his leash so violently that I nearly lost my grip. The woman's mouth opened, too wide, impossibly wide, and from it came that awful clicking sound. I ran. Yanking Duke's leash, I veered off the trail, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. Duke needed no encouragement, bounding ahead, pulling me forward. Behind us I heard movement. not running, but a swift, sliding sound, like something being dragged at impossible speed through the forest floor. The clicking grew louder, seemingly coming from multiple directions at once. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew no one was likely to hear. "Somebody help us!" We burst through a thicket of palmetto bushes into a small clearing, and I froze. Standing in the center, arranged in a perfect circle, were 7 stone pyramids identical to the ones we'd seen on the trails, and beyond them, my heart leapt, was what appeared to be a dirt access road. The sliding sound behind us was getting closer. Duke was frantic now, pulling toward the road with all his strength. Without thinking, I ran straight through the circle of stones, Duke at my side. As we crossed the invisible boundary they created, I felt a strange resistance, like pushing through cobwebs or thick smoke. The air seemed to vibrate around us, and for a moment, the forest went completely silent. Then we were through, sprinting down the dirt road. I didn't look back, didn't slow down. My lungs burned, muscles screaming in protest, but terror drove me forward. The dirt road seemed to go on forever, winding through the forest without any sign of connecting to a main road or the parking area. Just as despair began to set in, we rounded a bend, and there, like a mirage, was the gravel parking lot and my Subaru, exactly where I'd left it. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the unlock button. The car chirped, doors unlocking, and I yanked open the back door. Duke leapt in without hesitation. I threw my backpack in after him and slammed the door, then practically fell into the driver's seat. The engine started on the first try. Thank God for small mercies. I reversed sharply, tires spitting gravel, then peeled onto the main forest road, driving well above the posted speed limit. Only when we were on the highway, 15 miles away from the Ocala National Forest, did I finally allow myself to slow down and breathe. Duke had calmed somewhat, though he remained vigilant, watching out the windows as the forest gave way to rural homesteads and eventually small-town outskirts. I drove straight to my sister Emma's house in Gainesville, arriving as the afternoon sun was beginning to lower. She took one look at my scratched face, wild eyes, and filthy clothes and pulled me into a tight hug. "What happened?" she demanded, ushering me and Duke inside. I told her everything, the words pouring out in a jumbled, frantic narrative. To her credit, she didn't interrupt, didn't tell me I was crazy or that I'd imagined it all. She just listened, eyes growing wider as my story unfolded. When I finished, throat raw from talking and occasional sobs, she squeezed my hand. "I believe you," she said simply, "and you're staying here tonight. No arguments." That night, safely ensconced in Emma's guest room with Duke on the bed beside me, I finally checked my phone properly. There were 3 missed calls from Mark, my ex-husband, all from the previous evening. A text message followed the calls. "Rebecca, I know we're not on speaking terms, but I had the strangest dream about you tonight. You were in trouble, calling for help from somewhere dark. Please, just let me know you're okay." I stared at the message for a long time, then set the phone aside without replying. Some connections, it seemed, ran deeper than I'd realized. The next morning, over coffee, Emma showed me something on her laptop, a local news article from 3 years ago. The headline read, "Hiker still missing in Ocala National Forest, search scaled back." The missing woman's name was Eliza Carver, 34, an experienced solo hiker who had vanished without a trace on the Hidden Pond Trail. The article included a photograph of her. Athletic build, long dark hair, smiling at the camera with bright blue eyes. "This doesn't prove anything," Emma said gently, seeing my face pale. "But I thought you should know." I nodded numbly, unable to speak. Those eyes, normal in the photograph, kept appearing in my mind as bottomless black orbs. That clicking sound echoed in my memory. It's been nearly a year now. I've moved in with Emma temporarily, unable to face living alone. Duke hasn't left my side since that day, and I'm grateful for his constant presence. I've been seeing Dr. Winters twice a week, trying to process what happened. She gently suggests that extreme stress and agoraphobia could have caused hallucinations, that my mind conjured my greatest fears while isolated in the wilderness. I want to believe her. It would be easier. But 3 things keep me from accepting that explanation. First, there's Duke. His behavior that night was unlike anything I'd ever seen from him, before or since. Second, there's the pack of photographs I found at the bottom of my backpack a week after our escape. Photos I never took, showing the pond at night, each image containing a progressively closer view of something rising from the water, the final shot capturing only a pair of solid black eyes and the edge of what might have been a too-wide mouth. And third, most disturbing of all, there's what happened last month. I was shopping at a grocery store in Gainesville, Duke waiting patiently in the car, when I noticed a woman watching me from the end of the aisle. Thin, pale, with long dark hair. When our eyes met, she smiled, a fraction too wide, and raised her hand in greeting. Then she turned and walked away, her white dress moving oddly around her frame, as if it hung on a body whose proportions weren't quite right. I abandoned my cart and ran to the car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught sight of her in my rearview mirror, standing motionless among the other shoppers, still watching me. Still smiling. I don't go hiking anymore. I don't even walk in city parks. But sometimes, on very quiet nights, I hear a soft clicking sound from somewhere outside my window. And Duke, loyal, protective Duke, growls softly in his sleep, fighting battles I can only imagine. Dr. Winters says I'm making progress with my agoraphobia, but she doesn't understand that it's not open spaces I fear anymore. It's what found me in them, what recognized me somehow, what's still watching, still waiting. And most of all, I fear that whatever happened in those woods, whatever entity wore Eliza Carver's face and called my name, isn't finished with me yet. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Apalachicola National Forest, deep in the wilderness of Florida's Panhandle, about 15 miles west of Tallahassee. 2 years have passed, but I still wake up in cold sweats, my heart pounding as if trying to escape my chest. The doctors say writing it down might help. I'm not so sure, but I'm willing to try anything to make the nightmares stop. It was supposed to be a simple 3-day hiking trip. Just me, my German Shepherd, Rusty, and the wilderness. After my divorce from Claire, I needed space to clear my head. My therapist suggested reconnecting with nature might help with the depression that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. So I packed my gear, loaded up Rusty, and headed for the Apalachicola National Forest. The forest spans over 500,000 acres with dense pine flatwoods, cypress swamps, and blackwater streams. I'd chosen a remote trail that looped around Bradwell Bay, an area known for its old-growth cypress trees and challenging terrain. Perfect for someone wanting to get lost, figuratively speaking, of course. The drive from Tampa took about 4 hours. I arrived at the trailhead around noon on a Friday in late October. The air held that first hint of autumn crispness, a welcome relief after Florida's punishing summer. The parking area was empty except for a weathered pickup truck. As I unloaded my gear, a park ranger pulled up in his Forest Service vehicle. "Heading into Bradwell?" he asked, stepping out and adjusting his hat. "That's the plan," I replied, strapping on my backpack. The ranger, whose name tag read Michaels, nodded slowly. "You experienced with this area?" "I've hiked parts of Apalachicola before, but never this deep." "Well, stick to the marked trails. We've had some issues lately with people getting turned around." He paused, watching Rusty sniff around the perimeter of the parking lot. "That your dog?" Rusty trotted back to my side, ears perked forward. "Yeah, this is Rusty. He's good company." The ranger seemed to relax slightly. "Good to have a companion out there. Dogs have better instincts than we do sometimes." He handed me a map, newer than the one I'd printed out. "There's been some trail maintenance. This has the updated paths." He circled an area with his pen. "I'd avoid this section if I were you. Heavy flooding last month, And it hasn't quite dried out." I thanked him and tucked the map into my pocket. As I was about to leave, the ranger cleared his throat. "One more thing," he said, his tone casual but his eyes serious. "If you see anyone else out there, particularly around dusk, just keep to yourself. Some of the locals don't appreciate outsiders in certain parts of the forest. Old territorial disputes, nothing to worry about. Just keep your distance." Before I could ask what he meant, his radio crackled to life. He gave me a quick nod and returned to his vehicle, leaving me with an unsettled feeling. Rusty and I set off around 1 p.m. The main trail was well maintained, winding through stands of longleaf pine before descending into the lower wetlands. The weather was perfect. Clear, blue skies, temperature in the low 70s. My spirits lifted with each step, the weight of my failed marriage temporarily forgotten. By late afternoon, we'd covered about 7 miles. I found a clearing near a small stream to set up camp, just as the sunlight began to filter through the trees at that golden angle that photographers love. The sight was beautiful. A gentle slope with pine needles carpeting the ground, the stream providing a soothing background murmur. As I pitched my tent, Rusty suddenly tensed, his ears flattening against his head. He stared into the dense foliage across the stream, a low growl building in his throat. "What is it, boy?" I asked, following his gaze. The shadows between the trees seemed to deepen, though I could see nothing unusual. Rusty barked once, sharp and commanding, then looked at me as if expecting a response. When I didn't react, he returned to staring at the tree line, his body rigid. "Probably just a deer," I said, more to reassure myself than anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I finished setting up camp and started a small fire as darkness fell. The forest changed as night descended, transforming from serene to secretive. Sounds carried differently. The hoot of an owl seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, while the rustling of leaves suggested movement just beyond the firelight's reach. Rusty remained vigilant, positioning himself between me and the dark expanse across the stream. I fed him, then heated my own dinner, a dehydrated beef stew that tasted better than it had any right to. As I ate, I pulled out my phone to check for service, finding none. Not surprising this deep in the wilderness. I was about to put it away when I noticed something odd. Though I had no service, the time on my phone kept changing, jumping forward and backward by hours. 8:24 p.m., then 11:57 p.m., then back to 7:02 p.m. I restarted the device, but the problem persisted. Eventually, I turned it off completely, telling myself it was just a glitch. As I prepared for bed, the crackle of my campfire was interrupted by a distant sound, something between singing and wailing, carried on the night air. It was faint but unmistakably human. A woman's voice, high and keening. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. The forest fell silent, even the insects hushed. Rusty whined, pressing against my leg. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, running my hand along his back. "Probably just campers." But I remembered the ranger's words about keeping to myself if I encountered others, and his warning about locals who didn't appreciate outsiders. I doused the fire, leaving just enough embers to provide minimal light, and retreated to my tent with Rusty. Inside, I zipped the tent door closed and laid back on my sleeping bag, listening. Minutes passed, and the forest sounds gradually returned. The chirp of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. I began to relax, convincing myself I'd imagined the singing. Then Rusty stiffened beside me, a growl vibrating through his body. Before I could react, a twig snapped just outside the tent. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lay perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The nylon walls of the tent suddenly seemed absurdly fragile. Another sound, the soft shuffle of feet on pine needles, circling slowly. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound authoritative despite the tremor in my voice. No answer, just the continued shuffling, now moving toward the tent's entrance. Rusty's growl deepened, his hackles rising. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on just as a shadow fell across the tent wall. The silhouette of a person, small, possibly a woman, stood motionless outside. "I'm armed," I lied, hoping my voice didn't betray my fear. "State your business." The shadow remained still for a long moment, then slowly raised an arm, pointing towards the stream. Then it was gone, moving away so quickly I questioned if it had been there at all. Rusty darted to the tent door, barking furiously. My hands shook as I unzipped the tent, expecting. I don't know what I was expecting. But there was nothing, just the empty clearing, the soft babble of the stream, and the impenetrable darkness of the forest beyond. I should have packed up and hiked out right then. That's what any rational person would have done. But it was the middle of the night, and the thought of stumbling through unfamiliar forest in the dark seemed worse than staying put until morning. I didn't sleep much that night. Rusty alternated between growling at sounds I couldn't hear and pressing close to me, trembling. Twice more I heard that distant haunting singing, and each time it seemed closer. By dawn, I was exhausted but determined to cut my trip short. As I emerged from my tent, the morning light revealed something I hadn't noticed in the darkness, a crude symbol drawn in the dirt near the fire pit. A circle with a vertical line through its center, surrounded by smaller marks that might have been letters in a language I didn't recognize. Rusty refused to go near it, giving the mark a wide berth as he paced anxiously around the camp. I quickly packed up, driven by an increasing sense of unease. As I shouldered my backpack and checked the map, I realized the quickest route back would take me through the area the ranger had warned against, the flood-damaged section. I decided to risk it. 7 miles along the marked trail or 4 miles through the questionable area. The choice seemed obvious, especially with the weight of unseen eyes on my back. The path started easily enough, following a ridge above the wetlands. But within an hour, the trail began to deteriorate, becoming muddy and indistinct. In places, I had to wade through ankle-deep water where the path should have been. Rusty stayed close, unusually subdued. By midday, I was forced to admit we were lost. The landmarks didn't match the map, and the compass on my phone, now working again though still without service, seemed to spin randomly, never settling on a fixed direction. "Great job, Michael," I muttered to myself. "Real survival expert here." As if in response, a sound echoed through the trees, a laugh, high and sharp, too close for comfort. Rusty's head snapped up and he let out a warning bark. "Hello?" I called out, hating how my voice cracked. "Is someone there?" The laugh came again, followed by a woman's voice, clear as day. "You shouldn't be here, Michael." I froze. How did she know my name? "Who are you?" I demanded, spinning around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "They call me Anna," came the reply, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "This is my place. My family's place." A figure emerged from between 2 cypress trees about 30 yards ahead. A woman in her mid-30s, with long dark hair that hung in tangled waves down her back. She wore a simple white dress, impractically clean given the muddy surroundings. Her feet were bare, I noticed, yet somehow unmarked by the terrain. Rusty pressed against my leg, his growl continuous now. I placed a hand on his head as much to reassure myself as him. "I'm just passing through," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got a bit turned around, that's all. I'm heading back to the main trailhead." Anna tilted her head, studying me with an unsettling intensity. "Nobody just passes through here, Michael Williams. People come because they're drawn, because they're empty inside and need filling." She took a step closer. "Like you. Empty since Claire left. Empty and aching." Ice flooded my veins. I'd told no one in the park my ex-wife's name, had spoken to no one who could have passed that information along. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, taking an involuntary step back. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd stop following me." Anna smiled then, revealing teeth that seemed too small, too numerous. "I'm not following you. Michael, "I've been waiting for you. There's a difference." She gestured to a path I hadn't noticed before, leading off to the right. "That way will take you where you need to go. The way out, if that's what you still want." My instincts screamed to run in the opposite direction, but the sky was darkening rapidly, unnaturally, and I knew I needed to find my way out before nightfall. "Thank you," I said stiffly, giving her a wide berth as I moved toward the path she'd indicated. As I passed, she reached out, her fingers brushing my arm. Her touch was ice cold, sending a shudder through me. "You'll be back," she whispered. "They always come back to the cypress, Mother." I quickened my pace, not looking back until I'd put several hundred yards between us. When I finally did glance over my shoulder, she was gone. Rusty kept looking back, hackles raised, confirming I hadn't imagined her. The path Anna had pointed out was clearer than any I'd seen since leaving the main trail, leading steadily uphill away from the swampy lowlands. My relief was short-lived, however. As we walked, I began to notice things hanging from the branches overhead. Small bundles wrapped in cloth, tiny animal bones, and what looked like clumps of human hair tied with red string. The daylight continued to fade, though my watch, which had inexplicably begun working again, showed it was only 2 p.m. A heavy mist rolled in, reducing visibility to mere yards. Rusty's anxiety was palpable, his body tense, eyes darting from side to side. The sound started so gradually I almost didn't notice it. A faint scratching, like branches against a window during a storm. But as we continued, it grew louder, more deliberate. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It seemed to pace us, moving parallel through the trees to our right. I picked up my pace, and Rusty needed no encouragement to match it. The path began to narrow, the vegetation pressing in on both sides. Low-hanging Spanish moss brushed against my face, feeling uncomfortably like fingers trying to hold me back. The scratching intensified, accompanied now by a rhythmic thumping, something heavy moving through the underbrush, something large. I broke into a jog, then a full run, branches whipping at my face. Rusty sprinted ahead, then stopped abruptly, growling at something beyond my field of vision. I skidded to a halt beside him. The path ended at a small clearing dominated by an enormous cypress tree. Its trunk was easily 15 feet in diameter, its bark deeply furrowed and stained dark in places. Around its base, objects had been arranged in a careful circle, bottles filled with murky liquid, small cloth dolls, animal skulls, and photographs so weathered I couldn't make out the faces. A shrine of some kind. And sitting at the base of the tree was a young man about my age, dressed in hiking gear not unlike my own. He looked up as we entered the clearing, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "Oh, thank God," he said, rising to his feet. "Another person. I thought I was going to die out here." I approached cautiously, Rusty still growling. "You're lost, too?" The man nodded. "Been wandering for 2 days. Name's Jason Adams." He extended his hand. I hesitated before shaking it. His hand was warm, solid, human. Gradually, Rusty's growling subsided. "Michael Williams," I replied. "And this is Rusty. How did you end up here?" Jason ran a hand through his disheveled brown hair. "Came out for a day hike. Got turned around somehow. My GPS went haywire, then my phone died. Been trying to find my way back to the main trail ever since." He gestured to the massive cypress. "Stumbled across this place about an hour ago. Was just resting before trying again." His story matched my experience so perfectly it should have raised red flags, but I was too relieved to have human company to question it. "Have you seen anyone else out here?" I asked. "A woman named Anna?" Jason's expression darkened. "You've met her too. She's the reason I'm still stuck here." "What do you mean?" He sighed, sitting back down and motioning for me to join him. "I found the trail yesterday, or I thought I did. Was following it out when she appeared, told me I was going the wrong way. Like an idiot, I listened. Ended up more lost than before." As he spoke, I noticed a thin red line around his wrist like a bracelet of blood just under the skin. When he saw me looking, he pulled his sleeve down to cover it. "How did you get that?" I asked, suddenly wary again. "Get what?" "The mark on your wrist." Jason looked confused. "There's no mark. Must be a shadow or something." A chill ran down my spine. I took a step back, pulling Rusty with me. "I think we should keep moving. Find our way out before dark." "It's already getting dark," Jason said, gesturing to the dimming light. "Better to wait here until morning. Safer." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I glanced around the clearing, taking in details I'd missed before, the way the circle of objects seemed to trap us within its boundary, the dark stains at the base of the cypress tree that looked uncomfortably like dried blood. "We need to leave." "Now," I said firmly, backing toward the path we'd entered from. Jason's expression hardened. "You can't leave. She won't let you." "Who won't let me?" "The Cypress Mother. Anna's just her voice, her hands. But the Mother, she's in the water, in the soil, in the air we breathe out here." He spread his arms wide. "She's everywhere." As if on cue, a sound rose from the forest around us. That same singing I'd heard the night before, but now from multiple voices surrounding the clearing. Women's voices, chanting words I couldn't understand. Rusty barked frantically, spinning in circles as he tried to locate the source of the sound. I grabbed his collar, afraid he'd bolt into the forest. "What is that?" I demanded. "What's happening?" Jason smiled, and I noticed for the first time how his eyes caught the fading light, reflecting it like a nocturnal animal's. "Feeding time," he said simply. I ran. With Rusty at my heels, I crashed back onto the path, choosing a direction at random, anything to get away from the clearing and Jason's unnatural eyes. Behind us, I heard him call out, his voice suddenly different, deeper and resonating with something ancient. "Run all you want. The Mother needs what's empty to make things whole." The forest blurred around me as I fled, branches tearing at my clothes, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The singing followed, growing louder, closer. Shapes flitted between the trees, women in white dresses, their movements too fluid, too quick to be natural. One darted in front of me, forcing me to change direction. Another appeared to my left, hurting me. They were driving me somewhere, I realized with growing horror. Not catching me, steering me. The ground began to slope downward, the soil growing softer. The scent of stagnant water filled my nostrils. We were heading back toward the swamp. "Come on, Rusty," I gasped, pushing my burning muscles harder. The dog stayed close, his breath coming in ragged pants. A gap appeared in the trees ahead, a clearing different from the one we'd fled. I made for it desperately, hoping to find a position I could defend, somewhere to catch my breath. I burst into the open space and stopped so abruptly that Rusty collided with my legs. Before us lay a perfectly circular pond, its water black and still as glass. At its center stood a small island dominated by a cypress tree even larger than the one we'd seen earlier. Its massive roots twisted down into the water like grasping fingers. Around the pond's edge stood 7 women in white dresses, spaced equidistantly, their faces hidden by the gloom. Anna stood directly across from me, her features the only ones clearly visible in the dying light. "I told you," she said, her voice carrying easily across the water. "They always come back to the Mother." "I'm not staying," I said, trying to control my ragged breathing. "Let me pass. I just want to leave." "Nobody leaves Bradwell Bay without giving something to the Mother," Anna replied. "That's the bargain." "I don't make bargains with things I don't understand." Anna laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally. "Understanding isn't required, only submission." She gestured to the women surrounding the pond. We all submitted. We all gave what was asked. As if choreographed, each woman lifted her right arm, revealing a thin red line circling her wrist, identical to the one I'd seen on Jason. "What does she want?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. From you. Your emptiness. Anna took a step closer to the water's edge. The void Claire left inside you. The mother can fill it with purpose. I'd rather stay empty, I replied, slowly shifting my weight, ready to run again if an opening appeared. Anna's expression hardened. That's not a choice you get to make. The mother chose you the moment you entered her domain. As she spoke, the still water of the pond began to ripple, though there was no wind. Something dark and massive moved beneath the surface, circling the central island. Rusty whined, pressing against my leg. I wrapped my hand around his collar, ready to lift him if necessary. Despite his 60 pounds, adrenaline would make it possible. Last chance, Anna said, extending her hand toward me. Give willingly, and it will hurt less. My response was to turn and run, yanking Rusty with me back into the forest, away from the pond. The women's voices rose in anger behind us, their song turning to shrieks of rage. I heard splashing, something emerging from the water, and forced myself not to look back. I ran blindly, all thoughts of direction abandoned in favor of pure flight. Branches tore at my face, unseen roots tripped me repeatedly, but I kept pushing forward. Rusty stayed with me, his loyalty a comfort in the madness. The forest grew darker by the minute, the mist thickening until I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Behind us, pursuit crashed through the underbrush. Not just the women now, but something else. Something heavy that moved with a wet, slithering sound. My foot caught a root and I went down hard, pain shooting through my ankle. Rusty circled back, licking my face frantically. I struggled to my feet, putting weight on the injured ankle. It held, barely. "Good boy," I whispered, patting his head. "We need to hide." As if in answer, the trunk of a fallen cypress appeared in the gloom ahead, massive and hollow. I limped toward it, dragging Rusty with me. The opening was just large enough for both of us to squeeze through. Inside, the hollow was surprisingly dry, the wood around us sealing out the worst of the swamp's moisture. I pressed myself against the far wall, pulling Rusty close, and tried to quiet my breathing. Outside, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Branches snapped, water splashed. Women's voices called my name, sweet and enticing now rather than angry. Then another voice joined them, Jason's. "Michael," he called, his voice just outside our hiding place. "The mother only wants to help. She knows what it's like to be abandoned, to be left alone." I held my breath as a shadow fell across the entrance to the hollow. "Claire didn't understand you," Jason continued. "She left because she couldn't see your worth. The mother sees it. She can take that pain away." His words struck a nerve I didn't know was exposed. The divorce had been my fault, my depression, my withdrawal, my refusal to communicate. Claire had tried, God knows she had tried, but I had pushed her away until she had no choice but to leave. The shadow moved away from the entrance. "Think about it," Jason called, his voice receding. "She's patient. She can wait." Gradually, the sounds of pursuit faded. I sat in the darkness, holding Rusty close, feeling his heartbeat against my chest. Hours passed. My watch had stopped again, but I guessed midnight had come and gone before I dared to move. My ankle throbbed as I crawled to the entrance and peered out. The forest was quiet, the mist had thinned, and stars shone through gaps in the canopy overhead. No sign of Anna, Jason, or the other women. "Come on," I whispered to Rusty. "Let's try again." We emerged cautiously from our hiding place. I oriented myself using the stars. North should lead us back toward the main trail if we kept going long enough. Each step sent pain shooting up my leg, but I forced myself forward. The forest felt different now, less oppressive, more natural. Normal night sounds returned. The hoot of an owl, the distant splash of a fish jumping, the buzz of insects. My phone, when I checked it, still showed no service but displayed the correct time. 3:17 a.m. We walked for what felt like hours, my pace slowed by my injured ankle. As the first hint of dawn brightened the eastern sky, I caught sight of something ahead, a straight line through the trees that could only be man-made. "Please, be the trail," I muttered, forcing my tired legs to move faster. It was better than the trail. We emerged from the forest to find ourselves on a narrow paved road, a Park Service road, judging by the signs. In the growing light, I could make out the direction to the main highway, just 2 miles east. Relief flooded through me, so intense I nearly collapsed. Rusty seemed to sense it too, his tail wagging for the first time since we'd entered the forest. We made it to the highway just as the sun cleared the horizon. Within 20 minutes, a passing truck stopped for us, a local fisherman heading into Tallahassee. He took one look at my battered appearance and Rusty's exhausted state and offered us a ride without question. "Got lost in Bradwell, didn't you?" he asked as we climbed into his truck. I nodded, settling Rusty beside me. "Happens more than you'd think," the fisherman said, putting the truck in gear. "Something about those cypress groves messes with folks' heads. With the GPS, too." He glanced at me. "You're lucky you found your way out. Some don't." "Have you heard of something called the Cypress Mother?" I asked hesitantly. The fisherman's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Folks around here don't talk about that," he said firmly, "and if you're smart, you won't either." We rode in silence after that. He dropped us at the ranger station, refusing my offer of money for the ride. As he drove away, I noticed a thin red line around his wrist, visible for just a moment as his sleeve rode up. The ranger station was deserted when we arrived, too early for staff. I left a note explaining where I'd left my car, then Rusty and I walked the last mile to the trailhead parking lot. My car sat where I'd left it, a layer of dew glistening on its hood in the morning light. We drove straight back to Tampa, stopping only for gas and fast food that neither of us could eat. Rusty slept in the passenger seat, twitching and whimpering from dreams I hoped he'd forget. I didn't report what happened. Who would believe me? My hiking trip had gone wrong, I'd gotten lost and injured, but I'd found my way out. That's the story I told my friends, my therapist, myself. But sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear women singing in the distance. And twice, I've awakened to find mud in the carpet beside my bed, though neither Rusty nor I had been outside. Last week I found a small bundle hanging from my porch light, twigs and hair tied with red string. I took it down immediately, burned it in the sink. But as the flames consumed it, I heard a woman laughing, Anna's laugh. And this morning, when I was shaving, I noticed something in the mirror that sent ice through my veins. A thin, red line beginning to form around my wrist, just under the skin. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know what happened. Tomorrow, I'm leaving Tampa, driving as far from Florida as I can get. I don't know if distance will help, if the Cypress Mother's reach has limits, but I have to try. If you're reading this and considering a hiking trip to Bradwell Bay in the Apalachicola National Forest, reconsider. Some places aren't meant for outsiders, some emptiness isn't meant to be filled. And if you see a woman named Anna in a white dress, run. Run and don't look back. Don't listen to her voice, don't follow her paths. She's not what she appears to be, and neither am I, not anymore. My name is Jennifer Williams and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Tate's Hell State Forest, Florida, just last summer. The first thing you should know is that I wasn't supposed to be alone. My best friend, Melissa, and I had planned this camping trip for months, a week-long hiking adventure through Tate's Hell State Forest to celebrate our 10-year friendship anniversary. We had joked about the ominous name when booking our permits, if only we'd taken it as the warning it was. 3 days before we were set to leave, Melissa called with a family emergency. Her mother had fallen and broken her hip, requiring immediate surgery. She apologized profusely, promising we'd reschedule, but I could hear the stress in her voice. I told her not to worry, to take care of her mom, and that we'd plan something else soon. I should have canceled. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But after 6 months of working overtime at the marketing firm, dealing with a messy breakup, and the general suffocation of city life in Tampa, I desperately needed to disconnect. My therapist had actually encouraged me to spend time in nature to help manage my anxiety. So I decided to go alone. "You're kidding, right?" my brother Alex had said when I told him. "You've never even gone solo camping before, and you're choosing a place literally called Tate's Hell for your first time?" I laughed it off. "It's a popular trail, Alex. There will be other hikers. Plus, I have all the gear, I've done my research, and I'll stick to the marked paths." He wasn't convinced, but I promised to check in daily with my satellite phone. In retrospect, his concern was warranted. Not that it would have mattered. The drive to the forest took about 5 hours from Tampa. I arrived at the ranger station just after noon on a Tuesday in late June. The air was thick with humidity, and the scent of cypress trees and damp earth filled my nostrils as I stepped out of my car. The ranger, a weathered man in his 60s with deep creases around his eyes, looked up from his logbook as I entered. "Afternoon," he said, taking in my new hiking boots and obviously fresh backpacking gear. "You here to register for camping?" "Yes, I have a permit for 5 nights on the High Bluff Coastal Trail," I replied, sliding my paperwork across the counter. He glanced at it, then back at me with a slight frown. "Says here 2 people. My friend had an emergency. It's just me now." The ranger, his name tag read Frank, studied me for a moment. "You've solo camped before?" "Not exactly, but I've been on multiple trips with experienced friends. I'm well prepared." Frank sighed, removing his Park Service cap to wipe his brow. "I'd normally suggest the shorter loop for first-timers going solo, especially this time of year. We've had unusually heavy rains. Some of the back trails are partially flooded." "I'll stick to the marked paths," I assured him, "and I have a satellite phone for emergencies." After a moment of hesitation, he nodded and stamped my permit. "All right, make sure you sign in at each checkpoint. If you don't show up at the next station within your window, we send someone looking." He pulled out a map, circling several spots. "These are your checkpoints. The High Bluff Trail takes you through some remote areas between points 3 and 4. Cell service is non-existent, and even satellite can be spotty under the dense canopy." As he spoke, I noticed a wooden plaque behind him with a faded image of an old woman with unnaturally long fingers and sunken eyes. Beneath it was inscribed, "The Cypress Hag of Tate's Hell." "What's that?" I asked, pointing. Frank glanced over his shoulder. "Local legend. Story goes that back in the 1800s there was an old healer woman who lived deep in the swamp. They say she could speak to the cypress trees, and they'd whisper secrets to her. When settlers started cutting them down, she cursed the land." He shrugged. "Just a folktale to explain the difficult terrain. Some of the old-timers say if you get lost, you'll see her watching from between the trees." He chuckled, but there was something in his eyes that seemed uneasy. "Anyway, be sure to hang your food at night. We've had reports of some unusually bold wildlife recently." I thanked him, collected my stamped permit, and headed back to my car to grab my pack. As I was adjusting my straps in the parking lot, a young couple emerged from the trailhead. They looked exhausted, the woman limping slightly. "Heading in?" the man asked, nodding at my gear. "Yeah, the High Bluff Coastal Trail." They exchanged a glance. "We just came from there," the woman said. "Had to cut our trip short. The mosquitoes are brutal this year, and there's something off about the place." "Off?" I asked. "Just a feeling," the man said quickly. "Probably nothing. But if you're going alone, stick to the main paths. We thought we heard voices at night. Probably just other campers, but couldn't spot any lights." The woman shifted uncomfortably. "And watch out for the mud flats near Ralph's sinkhole. We lost our orientation there for hours yesterday. Even with GPS, the markers seem to lead in circles." I thanked them for the advice, trying to ignore the flutter of unease in my stomach. They were probably just inexperienced, I told myself. Or maybe they'd had a fight and were making excuses for ending their trip early. The first 2 days on the trail were uneventful, even beautiful. The forest was lush and vibrant. alive with the sounds of birds and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I made good time, stopping at the designated campsites and checking in at the first 2 ranger stations as required. The second station was unmanned, just a logbook and a weatherproof case where hikers signed in and out. As I recorded my information, I noticed the previous entries were dated nearly a week earlier. No other hikers had come through recently, which seemed strange for June. I tried to brush off my concern. Having the trail to myself meant peace and quiet, exactly what I'd come for. On the 3rd day, I entered the most remote stretch of the hike. The trail narrowed as it wound deeper into the forest, the canopy overhead growing denser until only scattered patches of sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The air became noticeably thicker, filled with the earthy scent of decomposing vegetation and stagnant water. Around midday, I reached Ralph's sinkhole, a large depression in the earth surrounded by cypress trees, their knees jutting from the ground like bony fingers. The sinkhole was filled with dark water, perfectly still despite the mild breeze rustling through the trees. According to my map, the trail continued around the eastern edge of the sinkhole, but as I circled, I found the path increasingly difficult to follow. Orange blazes marked the trees sporadically, but they seemed to contradict my map in places. After nearly an hour of frustrated backtracking, I finally found what appeared to be the continuation of the trail. By then, clouds had moved in, casting the forest in a grayish gloom that made it difficult to distinguish shadows from solid objects. I pressed on, determined to reach the next checkpoint before setting up camp. The map indicated a clearing about 2 miles ahead, a good spot to stop for the night. But as the afternoon wore on, the forest grew increasingly disorienting. The path twisted and doubled back on itself, cypress trees rising on all sides like silent sentinels. Their gray trunks and drooping branches created a labyrinthine effect, and more than once I found myself uncertain if I was still on the trail. My anxiety began to mount as the light waned. I should have reached the clearing by now. Checking my GPS, I found the signal was too weak to get an accurate reading, just as the ranger had warned. I tried the satellite phone with the same result. The dense canopy was blocking my connection. I decided to make camp where I was, choosing a small patch of relatively dry ground beneath a massive cypress. As I set up my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jerk my head up, expecting to see someone, or something, lurking between the trees. But there was only the gathering darkness and the increasingly vocal chorus of insects and frogs. After securing my food in a bear bag hung from a branch well away from my tent, I crawled inside, zipping the door closed with a sense of relief. Despite the humid air, I felt a chill that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep inside me. I told myself it was just first-time solo camping jitters and tried to focus on the natural sounds of the forest as I drifted off to sleep. I woke in the middle of the night to absolute silence. The abrupt cessation of the forest's nighttime symphony jolted me from sleep more effectively than any loud noise could have. I lay perfectly still in my sleeping bag, straining my ears. Nothing, no insects, no frogs, no rustling leaves. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic squelching sound, footsteps in mud, circling my tent. My heart slammed against my ribs as I reached for my flashlight with trembling fingers. The footsteps paused, then continued, closer now. They moved with deliberate slowness, each step followed by a subtle dragging sound. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but fear had stolen my voice. Instead, I clicked on my flashlight, its beam illuminating the interior of my tent. The nylon walls revealed nothing but shadows, until a figure passed between me and the nearest tree. I caught just a silhouette, unnaturally tall and thin, with elongated limbs that moved in a jerky, disjointed manner. It paused directly beside my tent, and I held my breath, praying my thundering heartbeat wasn't as loud as it seemed in my ears. A hand, or what I assumed was a hand, pressed against the tent wall near my head. The fabric dimpled inward. But what struck me with paralyzing terror was the shape. impossibly long fingers, at least twice the length they should have been, with knobby joints that bent at unnatural angles. "Tourist," whispered a voice, so close it might have been inside my head. The word was barely audible, a sibilant hiss that sounded more like wind through dry reeds than human speech. "Lost little tourist." I remained frozen, unable to scream, unable to move. "The trees," the voice continued. "They told me you were coming. They always tell me." The fingers dragged downward, scraping along the tent fabric with a sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the presence withdrew. The forest sounds resumed in a disorienting rush. Frogs, insects, the distant hoot of an owl, as if someone had unmuted the world. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat upright in my tent, flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other, until the first hint of dawn filtered through the canopy. When I finally gathered the courage to unzip my tent, I found the ground around it undisturbed. No footprints, no sign that anything had circled my campsite in the darkness. Had I dreamed it? A nightmare brought on by Ranger Frank's folk tale and my own anxiety about camping alone? I broke camp quickly, eager to be moving. My plan was to push through to the next checkpoint as fast as possible. There would be a ranger station there according to my map, and maybe other hikers. The rational part of my mind insisted I had experienced nothing more than a vivid nightmare, but a deeper instinct urged me to get out of these woods as quickly as possible. The trail seemed different in the morning light, both more navigable and somehow more sinister. The cypress trees loomed overhead, their hanging moss swaying despite the lack of breeze. I noticed details I had missed the previous day, carvings in some of the older trees, crude symbols that might have been letters in some alphabet I didn't recognize. By midday, I should have reached the next checkpoint, but the forest showed no signs of thinning. According to my map, I was heading east toward the coast, but without a working GPS, I had only my compass to rely on, and it was behaving strangely, the needle swinging erratically before settling on a direction that couldn't possibly be east based on the position of the sun. Around what I guessed was 2 o'clock, I came across a small stream cutting through the path. It wasn't marked on my map, but it flowed in the general direction I needed to go, and water sources typically lead to larger bodies of water. I decided to follow it, hoping it would lead me to the coast or at least to more open terrain. The stream bank was muddy but manageable, winding between the cypress trees and gradually widening as I progressed. The air grew thicker with moisture, and the vegetation changed subtly. More ferns, more water-loving plants crowding the edges of what was becoming less a stream and more a narrow river. After another hour of following the waterway, I noticed something odd ahead, what looked like a structure of some kind nestled among the trees on the opposite bank. As I drew closer, I could make out a small cabin, ancient and listing to one side, its wood weathered silver gray like the surrounding cypress trees. It almost looked like it had grown from the forest floor rather than being built there. Despite every horror movie warning bell ringing in my head, I decided to investigate. If nothing else, the cabin might contain a radio or some means of communication, and if it was abandoned, it could provide shelter for the night, seemingly safer than another night in a thin nylon tent. I crossed the stream at a shallow point, the cool water seeping into my hiking boots. As I approached the cabin, I noticed there were no footprints in the muddy ground surrounding it, no signs of recent human activity. The single window was covered with grime so thick it was opaque, and vines had begun to reclaim the outer walls. The door hung partially open, its bottom edge rotted away. I paused at the threshold, listening. Nothing but the gentle gurgle of the stream and distant bird calls. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door further open, wincing at the loud creak of rusted hinges. "Hello," I called, immediately regretting breaking the silence. My voice sounded foreign and intrusive in the stillness of the forest. The cabin's interior was a single room, dim despite the afternoon light filtering through cracks in the walls. It contained sparse furnishings, a crude table and chair, A metal-framed cot with a thin, stained mattress and shelves lined with glass jars containing unidentifiable dark substances. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its interior black with decades of soot. What drew my attention, however, were the walls themselves. Every inch was covered with the same symbols I had noticed carved into the trees, drawn here in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. They formed patterns that seemed almost like writing, loops and angular marks arranged in rows that my eyes couldn't quite track, as if the shapes were subtly shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. In the center of the room, suspended from the ceiling, hung a complex arrangement of twigs, bones, and what appeared to be human teeth, strung together with dark fibers. It twisted slowly in air that shouldn't have been moving, creating soft, clicking sounds as the pieces knocked together. I was backing toward the door when I noticed the photographs. Tacked to the wall beside the cot were dozens of Polaroid pictures, yellowed with age but still clearly visible. With mounting horror, I realized they showed people, hikers, given their attire, sleeping in tents. The photos had been taken from outside, the camera flash illuminating the silhouettes of the sleepers through the tent fabric. In some, long, distorted fingers pressed against the nylon, creating the same dimpled effect I had seen the night before. My blood turned to ice as I spotted a fresh Polaroid in the center of the arrangement. It showed my tent from the previous night, my own silhouette clearly visible inside. I ran. Out the door, across the stream, splashing clumsily through the water without concern for my footing or direction. Blind panic drove me forward, branches whipping my face and arms as I crashed through the underbrush. Only when my lungs were burning and my legs trembling with exhaustion did I finally slow, collapsing against a tree trunk to catch my breath. As my pulse gradually returned to something approaching normal, I tried to orient myself. The stream was nowhere in sight, and I had no idea which direction I had run. The sun was now obscured by the thick canopy, offering no guidance. I pulled out my compass with shaking hands, only to find the needle spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. Lost. I was well and truly lost in Tate's hell. I forced myself to think rationally. The forest couldn't go on forever. If I picked a direction and walked in a straight line, I would eventually reach its edge. With no better plan, I chose what I hoped was east and began walking, using my knife to mark trees as I passed to avoid going in circles. Hours passed. The forest grew darker as evening approached, but I was reluctant to stop. The thought of spending another night in these woods, especially without the minimal protection of my tent, left behind in my panicked flight, filled me with dread. But as the light faded to the point where I could barely see the trees in front of me, I knew I had no choice. I found a small clearing and gathered what dry wood I could find. The lighter from my abandoned pack was still in my pocket, and I managed to start a small fire. Its warmth and light provided little comfort as full darkness descended, bringing with it the now familiar symphony of nighttime forest sounds. Huddled as close to the fire as I dared, I tried to formulate a plan for morning. My satellite phone was gone, along with most of my supplies. I still had my water bottle, my knife, and a few energy bars stuffed in my pockets. Enough to keep me going for another day, maybe two if I was careful. The soft snap of a twig breaking jerked me from my thoughts. I peered into the darkness beyond my small circle of firelight, seeing nothing but vague tree shapes and deeper shadows between them. "Who's there?" I called, trying to sound more confident than I felt. No response, but I could feel a presence watching me. The forest had gone quiet again, that unnatural silence that had preceded the visit to my tent the night before. "I know you're there," I said, rising to my feet and gripping my knife tightly. "What do you want from me?" A low chuckle emerged from the darkness to my right, a dry, rasping sound like brittle paper crumpling. I spun toward it, raising my knife. "Put that down, girl," said a voice, ancient and female but undeniably human. "If I wanted to hurt you, that little pig sticker wouldn't save you." A figure stepped into the firelight and I had to stifle a scream. She was tall, at least 6.5 feet, and impossibly thin. Her body, little more than skin, stretched over an angular frame. Her face was deeply lined, eyes sunken into dark hollows, and her fingers. God, her fingers were exactly as I'd seen them, elongated and jointed in too many places, like insect legs. "You're her," I whispered, the knife trembling in my grip. "The Cypress Hag." She tilted her head, her neck bending at an angle that made my stomach lurch. "That's what they call me now. I've had many names. The trees remember them all." "What do you want from me?" I repeated, backing away as she took another step toward the fire. "You're trespassing," she said simply. "These woods are mine, have been since before your great-grandparents were born." She gestured at the forest around us with those disturbing fingers. "The trees tell me when strangers enter. They watch for me." "I'm just hiking through," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I got lost. I'm trying to find my way out." "Are you?" She cocked her head in that unsettling way again. "The trees whispered that you were running from something. Something in the city. A man who hurt you? A job that crushed your spirit? The trees hear everything you muttered to yourself as you walk their paths." I felt exposed, vulnerable. She was right. I had been talking to myself on the trail, sometimes about work, sometimes about Ryan and the breakup, private thoughts I'd believed no one could hear. "Please," I said, "I just want to leave. I don't belong here." "No, you don't," she agreed, "but leaving isn't simple. Tate's hell doesn't release its visitors easily, especially not those who peek into places they shouldn't." Her gaze was accusatory, like my home. My heart sank. "The cabin, that was yours." She nodded. "For longer than you'd believe. I keep track of those who wander too close. Insurance, you might say." "The photographs," I whispered, remembering the disturbing collection tacked to the wall. "Memories," she corrected, "of those who came before. Some left, some stayed." Her thin lips stretched into what might have been a smile, revealing teeth too numerous and sharp to be human. "Became part of the forest." I swallowed hard. "And what about me? Will I stay?" The hag studied me for a long moment, her head tilting farther until it was nearly perpendicular to her shoulders. Then she straightened, a series of soft pops accompanying the movement. "That depends," she said finally. "On what?" "On whether you can find your way out before dawn. The forest is different at night. Paths appear that aren't there by day. If you're clever or lucky, you might find one that leads to the edge. And if I don't?" Her smile widened further, splitting her face in a way that defied anatomy. "Then you join my collection, another memory on my wall." She stepped backward, melting into the shadows beyond the firelight. "Better start walking, Jennifer Williams. The night doesn't last forever." I stood frozen for several heartbeats after she disappeared, her use of my full name echoing in my ears. Then survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed a burning branch from the fire to use as a torch and plunged into the darkness in the opposite direction from where the hag had vanished. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to lose meaning in the nighttime forest. My improvised torch burned down quickly, forcing me to navigate by the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. The trees crowded closer, branches reaching out like grasping hands, underbrush clawing at my legs. Several times I thought I glimpsed movement in my peripheral vision, a tall, thin shape flowing between the trees parallel to my path. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing but shadows and silence. The forest began to change subtly. The cypress trees grew more twisted, their trunks contorting into shapes that suggested faces in torment, limbs reaching out in frozen agony. The ground beneath my feet became increasingly boggy, each step producing a wet, sucking sound that seemed obscenely loud in the quiet. I was deep in a swamp now, having to pick my way carefully from one patch of solid ground to another. Fetid water pooled around root balls and in depressions, its surface occasionally broken by movement just below. Fish? I told myself, though I knew few fish would inhabit water this stagnant. The moonlight glinted off the dark water, creating disorienting patterns of light and shadow. More than once, I thought I saw faces reflected in the pools, gaunt, hollow-eyed visages that opened their mouths as if to speak before dissolving into ripples. Then I saw it. A light in the distance, steady and warm rather than the cold gleam of moonlight on water. Hope surged through me. A light meant people, civilization, rescue. I altered my course toward it, moving as quickly as the treacherous terrain would allow. As I drew closer, the light resolved into a lantern hanging from a post. Beyond it stood a small wooden structure, not the hag's cabin, but a platform elevated on stilts above the swamp water. A fishing or hunting blind, perhaps. A refuge. I scrambled onto the platform, collapsing onto the rough wooden boards in exhausted relief. The lantern cast a warm glow over the simple structure, little more than a roof supported by 4 posts, with low walls on 3 sides providing minimal shelter. A metal box in one corner might contain supplies. For the moment, though, I was content to simply rest in the light, away from the watching eyes of the forest. After catching my breath, I investigated the box. It was padlocked, but the hasp was rusted and gave way with a few firm tugs. Inside, I found a scratched plastic water bottle, a package of beef jerky that looked relatively recent, and, miracle of miracles, a handheld GPS unit. With trembling fingers, I pressed the power button. Nothing happened. Dead batteries, most likely. I was about to toss it aside in frustration when I noticed a small solar charging panel in the bottom of the box. The unit might not work now, but come morning, I might be able to charge it enough to get a reading. Dawn was still hours away, however. I settled back against one of the support posts, rationing small sips from the water bottle as I tried to stay alert. Despite my best efforts, exhaustion began to take its toll. My eyelids grew heavy, my head nodding forward as consciousness slipped away. I jerked awake to the sound of splashing. The lantern had burned low, its light barely illuminating the platform and a small circle of swamp water around it. Beyond that circle, darkness reigned, but something was moving in that darkness, disrupting the water with regular splashes that grew steadily closer. I peered into the gloom, straining to see what approached. The splashing stopped just at the edge of the light. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a hand emerged from the darkness, pale, waterlogged, with flesh peeling from the fingertips. It gripped the edge of the platform, followed by another equally decomposed hand. A face rose into view between the hands. A man's face, bloated and partially decomposed, fish belly white except where black algae grew in the hollow of one cheek. His eyes were milky, unfocused, but they fixed on me with terrible awareness. "Help me," he gurgled, water spilling from his mouth with the words. "Please help me up." I scrambled backward until I hit the rear wall of the platform, unable to tear my gaze from the grotesque figure. He pulled himself higher, revealing shoulders and a torso clad in the sodden remains of what might once have been hiking clothes. "She trapped me," he said, his voice clearer now as he coughed up more swamp water. "The hag, like she's trapping you." Who are you?" I managed to ask. Daniel Lopez." He hauled himself further onto the platform, water cascading from his body. "I came here last autumn, got lost, found her cabin." Each phrase was punctuated by a wet cough. She gave me the same choice. Find my way out by dawn. "But you didn't," I whispered. He shook his head, a motion that sent something small and wriggling falling from his hair back into the water. The paths led me in circles. Every time I thought I was close to the edge of the forest, I'd find myself back in the heart of it. He had pulled himself entirely onto the platform now, his lower body as decayed as his upper half. When the sun rose, she found me. Did things to me, with those hands of hers. He reached toward me, his own decaying fingers splayed. "But I can help you. I know the way out now. I've had months to learn the paths." My back was pressed against the wall, nowhere left to retreat. "Why would you help me?" Something flickered in those milky eyes, a hint of desperation, of hunger. Because if I do, she might let me go too, or at least end this half-life. I didn't believe him. Couldn't believe him. This animated corpse was either a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear, or worse, a trap set by the hag herself. Either way, accepting his help seemed like signing my own death warrant. I'm going to wait for morning, I stammered. Try to charge this GPS. I held up the device as if it could shield me. Daniel's expression shifted, decay-stiffened features twisting into something like rage. Morning will be too late. She's already watching you, already knows where you are. He dragged himself closer, leaving a trail of putrid slime on the wooden boards. The lantern draws her, like moths. It's her light, her trap. I glanced at the lantern, its flame now little more than a flicker. As if in response to my attention, it guttered out completely, plunging the platform into darkness. I stifled a scream. "Last chance," came Daniel's voice, closer now. "Take my hand. I'll guide you out." "Stay back," I warned, fumbling in my pocket for my knife. A wet chuckle answered me. "You can't hurt me, Jennifer. I'm already dead. Already part of the forest." Then his cold, slimy fingers closed around my wrist. I screamed then, slashing blindly with the knife. It connected with something solid that yielded with a sickening squish rather than the resistance of living flesh. Daniel hissed in pain or anger, but didn't release his grip. "The forest wants you," he growled, pulling me toward the edge of the platform. "It gets lonely, needs new voices, new stories." I fought with desperate strength, kicking and stabbing as he dragged me across the rough wood. His other hand clamped around my ankle, his grip inhumanly strong. The edge of the platform loomed in the faint moonlight, dark water waiting below. Just as my head and shoulders cleared the edge, a new sound cut through the night, a high, keening whistle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Daniel froze, his milky eyes widening. "She's coming," he whispered, terror plain in his voice. The whistle grew louder, accompanied by a rushing sound like wind through trees, though the air remained still. Daniel's grip on me loosened, and I seized the opportunity to wrench myself free, scrambling back onto the platform. "Hide me," he pleaded, attempting to pull himself under the platform. "Don't let her find me again." But it was too late. A shadow fell across the water, impossibly tall and thin, cast by no visible source. Daniel released a wail of pure anguish as the shadow touched him. Before my horrified eyes, his decomposing body began to sink into the swamp, not floating as a normal corpse would, but being pulled down as if by an invisible hand. "She promised to let me go," he gurgled as the water reached his chin. His milky eyes locked with mine one last time. "Don't believe her promises." Then he was gone, the dark water closing over his face with barely a ripple. I huddled against the platform's center post, shaking uncontrollably, waiting for the hag to emerge from the darkness. But the shadow across the water dissolved, and the unearthly whistle faded into the normal sounds of the nighttime swamp. I remained frozen in place for what felt like hours, jumping at every sound. Eventually, exhaustion overcame terror and I must have dozed off, for I awoke to gray pre-dawn light filtering through the cypress trees. The events of the night seemed dreamlike in the growing light, but the trail of slime across the platform's wooden boards was undeniable evidence that something had been there. Something dead that moved. The GPS unit lay where I'd dropped it during the struggle. I placed it on the small solar panel and positioned it in a patch of strengthening sunlight. Then I waited, watching the forest warily for any sign of the hag or other unnatural visitors. By mid-morning, the GPS had charged enough to power on. Its screen flickered to life, showing a rudimentary map with my position clearly marked, on the eastern edge of Tate's Hell State Forest, less than a mile from a ranger station on the coastal side. I could hardly believe it. After all the disorienting wandering of the previous day, how could I have stumbled so close to safety? It seemed impossible, or like another trap. But staying on the platform meant certain death when night fell again, so I had no choice but to trust the GPS and move. Pocketing the device, I climbed down from the platform and picked my way carefully through the swamp, following the arrow on the screen. The morning was bright and warm, the forest almost beautiful in the sunlight, which made it all the more jarring when I began to notice the photographs. They were nailed to trees along my path, Polaroids identical to those I'd seen in the hag's cabin. Pictures of tents with sleeping silhouettes inside, some recent, others faded and yellow with age, and interspersed among them, images of contorted faces frozen in expressions of terror or pain. I tried not to look too closely, focusing instead on the GPS and the promise of the ranger station ahead. The trees thinned gradually, and I began to smell salt on the breeze. The Gulf of Mexico, close now. Hope surged through me as patches of blue sky became visible overhead, just a little further. I was so focused on the GPS and the thinning trees ahead that I almost walked straight into her. The hag stood directly in my path, even taller and more grotesque in daylight than she had appeared by firelight. Her skin was like tree bark, cracked and gray, and what I had taken for clothing was actually part of her body, layers of something like moss or lichen growing over her skeletal frame. "Clever girl," she said, those two sharp teeth flashing. "You found the night path. Most don't." I clutched the GPS like a talisman. "The screen says the ranger station is close, less than a mile. You said if I found my way out before dawn, you'd let me go." "And so I shall," she replied, those impossibly long fingers gesturing toward the thinning trees. "The station is indeed close, just beyond those pines." I hesitated, not trusting her sudden acquiescence. "Why are you letting me go? The others?" I glanced at one of the Polaroids nailed to a nearby cypress, showing a young man's terrified face. The hag tilted her head at that familiar, unnatural angle. "They broke the rules, damaged the trees, littered the paths with their garbage, disrespected the forest." Her voice grew harder. "Some tried to burn my home, others hunted for sport, taking more than they needed." She took a step closer, her height forcing me to crane my neck to maintain eye contact. "But you spoke kindly to the trees as you passed, thanked them for their shade, asked permission before taking their fallen branches for your fire." A sound like dry leaves rustling emanated from her throat. Laughter, I realized. The forest noticed. I noticed. Part of me wanted to run, to sprint for the safety promised by the thinning trees and the GPS arrow. But something kept me rooted in place. "Daniel," I said. "The man in the water. Was he real?" The hag's expression shifted subtly. "Daniel Lopez thought he could outsmart the forest. Came with hunting equipment and jugs of accelerant. Planned to clear-cut a section for his own private camp. The forest objected." "You killed him," I said, shivering despite the morning warmth. "The forest reclaimed him," she corrected, "as it does all who seek to harm it. He serves as a guardian now, a warning to those who might follow his path." Her gaze was penetrating. "Did you heed that warning, Jennifer Williams?" I nodded, unable to speak. "Good." She stepped aside, clearing my path to the thinning trees. "Then go. Return to your city. But remember what you've seen here. Remember that the wild places have guardians, old things with long memories." I edged past her, half expecting those elongated fingers to lash out and seize me. But she remained motionless, only her eyes tracking my movement. When I was several yards past her, I couldn't resist looking back. "The photos in your cabin, all those people. Trespassers," she said simply. "Those who came to take, not respect. The forest keeps their memories, their essence." A smile spread across her face, revealing more of those needle-like teeth. "Perhaps a small piece of you will remain as well, a token for the trees to remember you by." My hand flew instinctively to my jacket pocket where I kept my own phone. I hadn't been able to make calls or send texts without signal, but I'd taken plenty of photos during the first 2 days of my hike. The pocket was empty. "Just a few images," the hag said, producing my phone from somewhere within the moss-like folds of her body. "The forest collects memories, Jennifer. Yours will join the others." She pocketed my phone and made a shooing gesture. "Now go, before I reconsider my generosity." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush toward the promise of open sky. Behind me, I heard that dry leaf laughter fading into the ambient sounds of the forest. The trees thinned rapidly, and suddenly I was standing at the edge of a gravel road. Across it stood a small wooden building with a Park Service emblem, the ranger station. Relief flooded through me as I staggered toward it. A different ranger than Frank sat at the desk inside, a young woman who looked up in alarm as I burst through the door. I must have been a frightening sight. Clothes torn and filthy, scratches covering my face and arms, wild-eyed with exhaustion and fear. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She stood, reaching for the radio at her belt. "I got lost," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "In Tate's Hell. 3 days." Her expression shifted from alarm to concern. "Sit down before you fall down. I'll get you some water." She guided me to a chair, then poured water from a cooler into a paper cup. "What's your name? Do you have ID?" "Jennifer Williams," I croaked after gulping the water. "My pack. I lost it. Everything's gone." She nodded, speaking into her radio. "Pete, we've got a lost hiker at East Station. Female, appears dehydrated and exhausted. Name Jennifer Williams." She listened to the response, then turned back to me. "Did you register at headquarters? They'll have your information on file." I nodded. 5 days ago. High Bluff Coastal Trail permit." Her eyebrows rose. "You've been out there for 5 days? In this heat? You're lucky to be alive." She handed me another cup of water. "Stay put. Medical assistance is on the way." While waiting for the paramedics, the ranger, whose name badge read Sanchez, asked me what had happened. I gave her an edited version. I'd gotten disoriented after the trail markers seemed to lead me in circles, then lost my pack while trying to find my way out. I mentioned nothing about the hag, Daniel, or the photographs. Even in my exhausted state, I knew how it would sound. But Ranger Sanchez seemed to sense there was more to my story. "You're not the first person to get turned around in there," she said, studying me with an odd expression. "Something about the cypress stands messes with people's sense of direction, especially near Ralph's sinkhole." I looked up sharply. "You know about the sinkhole?" She nodded. "Notorious spot. We've had to rescue at least a dozen hikers from that area in the past year alone. People say the trails shift, markers move overnight." She shrugged. "Probably just confusion and panic. But—" She trailed off, glancing out the window toward the forest. "But," I prompted. Sanchez hesitated. "The old-timers have stories. A woman who lives deep in the swamp, protects the trees." She gave a self-conscious laugh. "Cypress hag, they call her. Local superstition, obviously." I said nothing, staring into my empty water cup. "Anyway," she continued, "we've had some issues with illegal logging and poaching in the protected areas. The culprits seem to have a knack for disappearing." She gave me a searching look. "You didn't happen to see anything unusual out there? Besides getting lost, I mean." Before I could decide how to answer, the paramedics arrived, effectively ending our conversation. They checked me over, confirmed I was dehydrated and exhausted but otherwise unharmed, and recommended a trip to the hospital for IV fluids and observation. I didn't argue. As they were helping me into the ambulance, Ranger Sanchez approached with a small plastic bag. "Found this outside, near where you came out of the trees," she said, handing it to me. "Thought it might be yours." Inside was my phone, the same one I'd seen the hag take from me less than an hour earlier. I stared at it in disbelief. "Something wrong?" Sanchez asked. I shook my head. "No, it's mine. Thank you." She nodded, but her expression remained curious. "Take care of yourself, Jennifer, and maybe stick to the more populated trails if you go hiking again." "I will," I promised, though I knew that I would never set foot in any forest again if I could help it. At the hospital, after being hooked up to fluids and left to rest, I finally worked up the courage to check my phone. It powered on normally, battery at 50%. Impossible, given how long I'd been in the woods with no way to charge it. I opened my photo gallery with trembling fingers. All the pictures I'd taken during the first 2 days of my hike were gone. In their place was a single image, a selfie I had no memory of taking. It showed me asleep in my tent that first night, the nylon walls dimpled inward by long, spindly fingers pressing against the fabric from outside. At the bottom of the screen, in small white text like a caption, were the words, "The forest remembers." I deleted the photo immediately, then reset my phone to factory settings before turning it off. Even now, months later, I use a different phone, a different number. I moved from Tampa to Miami, seeking the comfort of concrete and crowds, far from the quiet whispers of trees. My therapist calls it post-traumatic stress, a normal reaction to getting lost in the wilderness alone. The night terrors, the panic attacks when I hear rustling leaves, my absolute refusal to go camping again. All typical responses to trauma, she says. But sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear dry leaves laughing. And on nights when I can't sleep, I check my window locks twice, fearful of finding long, jointed fingers pressing against the glass. Because no matter how many times I tell myself it wasn't real, I know the truth. The forest remembers, and so do I. And somewhere in Tate's Hell, pinned to the wall of an ancient cabin, a photograph of Jennifer Williams reminds other hikers to tread carefully among the cypress trees, because the forest is always watching, and it never, ever forgets.